Welcome to Jacket Jockeys with Justin.
And Jennifer.
Oh no,
You look shocked.
I was not ready for
You
that.
look shocked. That's
Wow.
my name. Hi. Hey, it's me. Sorry. Sorry for any confusion. It's me.
I thought your name was Stacy.
Yeah. Stacy, if you nasty.
Or was it Susan? All right, anyway. So yeah, we're here. This is a bonus-ode, if you like. A special bonus episode. That's what bonus-ode means.
Bonus-ode. Gross.
It's not an episode about bones.
Promise me you'll never say
Um,
that unless it is for dogs. It's all about the best bones, best ways to bury bones, best places to find bones, what to do if you come across somebody else's bones. I will never, ever do a podcast about the TV show Bones.
or about Bono, you know?
Ugh.
Bono? Is it
Hard
Bono?
pass. I think it's Bono.
Would that be a bonisode?
Bonisode. Let's do a special Bonisode about how much I hate his sunglasses.
And then there's Sunny Bono. We could do a Sunny Bonosode.
Mm-hmm. The possibilities are endless.
All right, I'm sorry. I'm obviously not on topic here. So yeah, we're here to discuss a piece of drama that has obsessed me for decades at this point.
Decades.
Since I originally saw it, I believe back in about 2004. And this is Oleanna by David Mamet. We're going to discuss the play version as well as the film version starring William Hilliam Macy and Deborah Eisenstadt.
Oh, that's what the H
Hilliam, yeah. It's William Hilliam. I thought everyone knew. Um, like
yeah. So this podcast, it has a bit of a backstory. I also encountered it in 2004, courtesy of your influence.
strong recommendation.
And it infuriated me to the extreme. At that time, I was a young woman in college, and it was, as you say, 2004 that we watched this. It was originally staged in May of 92. So, some time had passed, but I think it's extremely significant, the context in which it was written, in which it was staged, in which we initially watched it, and now when we are recording this in 2024. And I just want to go on the record real quick to say that this doesn't happen. Women then and now find it nearly impossible to get any kind of justice when they are mistreated by men. Conservative men like David Mamet seem to believe that women are devious schemers waiting to ruin their lives by overreacting to things and casting them, decontextualizing their innocent behavior and casting them as villains and ruining their lives. And I think now, living in this moment of backlash to the Me Too movement, there's maybe a little more awareness about this, but I'm putting all of this out in front. One, because I want to lose listeners who don't believe me on this. I don't care. I don't care about your clicks.
But
And
now, I mean, I feel like this is a
two,
Yellow Jackets podcast. I feel like there's at least some sympathy in the audience.
yeah,
Anyway,
I hope so. I will also say not all men, but a lot of them, more, and obviously on a spectrum. Um, and also because the other reason I wanted to say this at the top is to acknowledge that the first time I watched this, when I watched the film, that was the only aspect of it that I was paying attention to. And now reading it as a 40-year-old in this particular moment in which we live, after all these decades of all these 20 years of rhetoric and
Just for the record, it's Black Friday 2024
yeah,
as we're recording this.
and it's gonna get blacker. I don't know what that means.
I don't either,
That
but I like it.
that reading this play yesterday, I was struck by a lot more dimensions of it, that I think are really interesting, and that we have seen kind of flourish in certain ways in the political so-called discourse in the last like 10 years. And anyway, I also just want to say, and then I will allow you to speak a bit, is that
Thank you.
I also just want to say, I'm not here to say that context is the only thing that we should, for instance, cancel, and I put cancel in heavy quotes because no one has really been canceled. But anyway, that's a separate. But like, I'm not here to say we should um disregard the quality of work because of the views held by the creator or because of the context in which it was made. But this is about, but context does matter because people do not experience art in a void of context. Like there's always a context, and I think that should be considered. And clearly in this there are these heavy themes as well. So I'm not just going to be talking about the aesthetic dimensions of this piece, as you can probably already guess. So
Yes.
that's my
And in
intro.
turn, I will probably overemphasize them. But no, yeah, that's fair. I think, yeah, it's important to get that on the table. And I guess for my side of the story, I'll just say that it was like, I guess I was viewing it in like the exact opposite way, which is to say I wasn't really worried about the political implications of the story. For me, it was just a fascinating drama with really compelling dialogue and characters, and in a situation that I have a personal attachment to. I mean, this whole thing, higher ed is like the world I've been in since that time, basically. Even before that, it's been my whole life. So I think there really are. I think Okay. God, oh man, I keep backing up. I don't know how far to back up here. Yeah. So one thing I want to make sure I say is I am fully aware that for real, unambiguous sexual harassment is a thing that happens and has happened, and it's unacceptable. I mean, it's not a thing that should in any way be excused or diminished or whatever. Just to be clear on that, like I take that very seriously because that's. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I think like there's potential when you're on that side, actually when you're on either side, but especially when you're on the side holding the power, which is the professor, generally speaking, you are asked to make a lot of judgment calls and go through a lot of interactions that have the potential to go wrong, and you have to be careful about the way you do things, and you make judgment calls, and sometimes they're not the right ones, and it's a tricky situation. So to me, like the exploration of the ways it can go wrong that are not obvious or are more ambiguous, like, is interesting
Yeah.
because I feel that that is, an important part of that experience, even if it's not the only thing that happens, or the most damaging thing that happens. I think like there is something to that, the way that you might say something casually and not think about how it's coming across.
Yeah.
And because I feel like that's a lot of what happens in Act One, and so anyway, I think that's like I appreciate it more now that I've been in the world longer, and been on that side of things, the professor side of things, with a student coming saying, I've got a problem with my grade. What do I do? Try, I don't understand anything. I'm bad at this, blah, blah, blah. Like it's so accurate in that side.
Mhm.
Like that exact conversation has
I
happened.
know.
Now I don't respond the way he does. Now he's a he's a some kind of like education professor. I feel like that's what we're supposed to think based on the topics of his book.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah, sort of like a sociology of education or
Sociology of
philosophy of education.
education. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
there
sounds right.
yeah, it's a lot about critiques of higher ed and power and social class as well as obviously gender. Um and as you say, fundamentally about like power, intent, impact. And in the past 10 years, I think there's been a lot more conversation and awareness building around those, and some pendulum swings of, impact is everything. It doesn't matter what your intent was, to, well, wait a second, intent. There is still some differentiation to be made. So I think we have and there's a line in the play toward the end where he finally names what he thinks is happening as political correctness, kind of coming back to him. And I just want to say again about the context in which this was originally staged. 1992, this is the beginning of the culture wars of the 90s, not the culture wars of today.
Though
This
there's some
backlash.
connections, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, this backlash to the gaining of rights, right? And
Yeah.
so this was also a few months after the Clarence Thomas hearings, where everyone in the United States got a firsthand glimpse of how little credit is given to women when they speak their truths. And so just and then now, we're watching this in this again, like a post Me Too movement or moment, like this backlash to um a kind of an accountability against people in power, especially men in power. We're definitely in that backlash now, and we're living in a time where there's just been this raking over the coals of what happened this November with the election and what it means about the relationship between the attitudes and priorities of people who have gone that route of higher education and people who have not, and the kind of the discourse that happens in universities and in other kinds of elite institutions. So I just think it's a fascinating time to reread this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It holds up. I think that's at least part of why it's still staged routinely. Like there is something there. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say more generically is like I've definitely had to come to terms with this because it's been a hot button topic in culture of just engaging with work that either is made by someone who has views and uses their platform to express them that I find awful, which applies to Mamet, but also, those views are actually expressed in the work itself, which is definitely true here to a degree. Like, I
Right.
think you can see his point of view coming out in several moments. The interesting thing I think about his point of view is that although he does possess that male paranoia, that's a classic thing trope. I think he also has not a great, and he said this directly in interviews and stuff about this story. He doesn't have, actually, I listened to an interview with him about this where they specifically asked him about William H. Macy and Felicity Huffman's like scandal of paying money to get their kid admitted to some elite college. I don't
I
remember which
forgot
one.
about that.
They
Yeah.
asked him about that specifically, and of course he didn't like address it specifically, but what he said was, the admission process for those elite universities has always been corrupt.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that.
And he went on to basically like lambaste universities, and he said something like, you could there's really very little they have to teach you that you couldn't learn from going to a library, and probably you'll learn it better if you go to a library. And so anyway,
Ugh, I
like
don't agree with that.
that's
I love
I
libraries.
don't
Love libraries.
necessarily agree with that, but I feel like that's a window on, because I love
Yeah.
higher ed. That's my world. I have,
Yeah.
I think there's greatness about it, but even though it has serious pitfalls, but nonetheless, I think it indicated that he's not like on the side of the higher education world
Oh,
either.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny because, and definitely I recommend reading this play because just listening to this podcast, none of it is going to make any sense. I mean, I guess you can watch the movie. I thought the play was better. Um, but,
Most people think the play is better. I think the movie version is actually pretty good. But it's a tricky. I think making a play into a movie is always tricky, and there's some artifice involved in the way that they
yeah,
try to make that work.
yeah,
And it does lose some of the starkness of the play, because it's very minimal,
yeah.
everything. Even the actions are described like extremely minimally. I think to me that's actually one of the things that I found most interesting about the movie version this time is the places where the play leaves some room for interpretation of like, how are you going to portray this? Like, I'm thinking of, for example, in Act Two, he restrains her.
Yeah.
It's like that's what it says, and like you could play that in a few
Yeah,
ways.
yeah. I found myself really wanting to know. So I read this and then later the same day watched the movie again for the first time since 2004. So 20 years. And wow, I'm old. And um and I found myself really curious to see how he directed the stage version. Because as you say, it's minimal instruction about the action. And a lot of the kinds of questions, as you said in the beginning, um, there's a lot that comes down to the nuance when you try to understand, okay, what really happened here and how bad was it? Um, the the point you were making about his attitudes about higher ed and how they come through, one thing that I didn't notice when I watched it 20 years ago was how so it's three acts, and how in act one Carol gets very few lines because he's constantly interrupting her, and it's just really destabilizing for her. She's trying to say, I need support with learning that you are not providing. I don't understand the vocabulary of higher ed, and this is coming down to a socioeconomic divide between the language that I am familiar with and the language that is being used in your book and in your classes. And she can not, and then there's more to it than that, but that is sort of the premise that brings her there. um and then by act two, and then really by act three, she's walking in there with a whole theoretical framework of how his behavior, it's like it's this generational cycle of critique. He's got this critique of higher ed, and yet he is working within those systems, and he's using those tools when they benefit him and buying into the systems when they benefit him. And then a result of that, his encouragement of his students to question authority and question what they're taught. And then she turns around and she does it. And so there's also this. and you can read this as part of just the conservative critique of progressivism in higher ed, but I think it's more than just that. This, like, you know, oh, what is the phrase? Like, kill your, um it's not kill your heroes or whatever, but like, this progressivism is kind of designed to, when you invite people to question authority, they're going to question yours.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Anyway, I
Definitely.
kind of lost the thread
Yeah.
of my point there, but I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it
It's
seems
very
like there's a point
fascinating.
in there about the way that the specific topic that the class is about, or at least part of his book is about, it becomes uh, directly relevant, you know, in the end.
You know what else is going on here? And maybe so you've like you've read some critiques of this. I have not.
Yes.
Um I have, do you wait, do you have a way you want to do this?
Well, so I was thinking we would talk generally for a while and then we start going through bit
Okay.
by bit.
Okay.
That's it's more or less like we do a normal podcast about TV or whatever. I mean, I'm not
Okay.
going to describe scene by scene because it's a play,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
it's not something you briefly summarize.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I figured we would kind of walk through it. One general thing also that I wanted to say about you know, like Mamet and his conservatism, like I think one thing that's in there, I don't know if he would say this, but I have heard it said that you know, a classical like conservative principle is that um society changes but human nature doesn't. And I feel like there's some of that here with the addition of humans are inherently um inclined to abuse any power they have. I think he believes that. And I
Uh,
think that's sort of the principle that it's built on. It's saying this professor is entitled, feels entitled to use his power in ways that I think are reasonably called abusive. And then when Carol gets involved in this group and starts like working the system, she realizes she has a lot of power, and you could argue she abuses that to some degree.
yeah.
And so I feel like that's kind of the underlying idea that kind of unifies both of their transgressions, at least in the eyes of Mamet.
Yeah, and that reminds me, the like the other piece of what I was trying to get at is like, to the extent that it's like, whose side are you on is not really, it's not really the question, but
Yeah.
it's kind of natural to wonder like, what, whose side is the writer on? And it's like, he's definitely on the side of not the tools of higher education.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that, when like you're on, your sympathies are with Carol in the beginning because he is such a
He's
blowhard.
just steamrolling
And
over anything she tries to
absolutely.
say.
And then, when she adopts these tools of higher ed, this elitist vocabulary, all of this, then that's, that the critique is of that language,
Yeah.
which is the language of power in this context. I also think one last random thing, this was staged in Boston in collaboration with the ART, which is based on like right on the Harvard campus, and just the capital of higher ed. I think it would have been absolutely bananas to be able to see that initially, in 92 in Boston, this like
Yeah,
capital of
yeah.
higher ed. I mean, I can't even imagine the reactions to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think it had a pretty strong reaction.
Pissing everyone off.
Yeah, yeah. In Roger Ebert's review of the movie version, which he didn't like, although he did like the play, um, he talked about seeing it in Chicago, which is where I thought it would have been done originally because Mamet is from Chicago, but I guess it was actually done in Boston. Anyway, um, originally, so it must have been some later production. But he was talking about how he saw married couples arguing in the
I'm
like
sure.
in the hallways, like during the breaks between the acts, you know,
I am
and how like
sure.
the nature of those arguments kind of changed over the course of the play, you know, like that it was very specifically like dividing them
Yeah.
and to me I think like I guess yeah, that was another thing I wanted to say because I'm not someone who thinks like, oh, if something's like really fucked up, that makes it good. Like I don't believe that. Um and like there's stuff with politics that that I think are I agree with, but it's also good. Like just because I agree with the politics doesn't make it bad, which is a weird thing to say. But anyway, just to clarify, I don't automatically think that that makes it bad. I could bring up examples of that, um, but uh, I think that uh when you find someone expressing something like this in a way that I think is, artfully done, but isn't necessarily, what I would consider to be the, the most refined opinion on this topic, or even correct in many aspects. Like there are specific fears here. Like I guess I would frame this as, like if I'm driving on the road, or you could say in a plane or something, like these situations where if a car is next to me, I think, oh man, if they just turn that steering wheel, like this would be a nightmare, and like I can understand a nightmare fantasy of like, well, if a student just decided to say that I said something or I did something and there's no witnesses, you
Yeah.
know what would I do? I can understand being
Paranoid.
paranoid about that
Yeah.
on a level. I think that does turn nasty at a certain point and unfair. So I think about the way Anita Hill was treated, the way that Monica Lewinsky was treated, which was a bit later, but still is bizarre it's like I get it, but it's like I mean that's why you have such rage about it at
Mhm.
this point, and back then too.
Yeah.
It's just more mainstream, I think, to be enraged about such things these days. But uh uh you know uh I think it goes it becomes a political cudgel that is unfair, like a sort of nightmare fantasy,
Well, right.
that like you do depend to a degree on like a certain amount of good faith and goodwill from others to get on in the world. And I mean that's not the only form it can take. And if you really have conducted yourself in a way that you think is responsible and fair, then if that actually happens, you should be able to, and like injustice happens in the world. It's no guarantee, but like I mean, that's the world we live in. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple points I would make to that is I understand where fear comes from. I mean, to the extent that anybody does. But like it's a question of whose concerns are being centered and what's the other side
Yeah,
of that, of
yeah,
this idea that power should not come with responsibility. There's that great phrase everybody likes to quote from like Superman or whatever: with great power comes great responsibility. It's like you're like, oh, boo-hoo, you have to leave your office door open if you're meeting one-on-one with a student.
yeah,
Like, just these basic things
yeah, 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 yeah,
that, or like, boo-hoo, it's not appropriate to touch a student even if you don't
yeah,
have any sexual intent.
yeah,
Like, okay, so there might be like one woman in 1,000, or one person on the opposite side of a power dynamic in 1,000, or whatever it is, who is going to take advantage of that and try to take a person down by lying. Like the thing in the Yellow Jackets about like, I'm gonna tell everybody how weird your balls are.
yeah, right,
This like
right.
this threat that women might just lie and get you in a lot of trouble. Well, guess what? It assumes that you will actually get in trouble, which is almost never the case. And second of all,
That guy
even
was a sleaze
if
bag too,
that guy's a
so
sleazebag.
it's not really framed the same way.
That's
But
not the
go ahead.
point. No, it's not. And that's why we watch that and we just laugh. And
Yeah,
couples watch this and they get into a fight.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not just the fact that there's almost never consequences for the men. Harvey Weinstein, what's he up to? He's doing fine. Actually, I don't even know. But he's like the most prominent
He was
example.
in
They're
jail, but
all
I guess he got
he
out.
got out of jail.
So yeah,
Um
I don't know. I guess he's doing okay-ish these days. Yeah.
but
Anyway,
anyway,
sorry. Go ahead.
so it's not just that there are very rarely lasting consequences, if consequences at all, but also that
And Harvey
these
Weinstein, I mean, from what I mean, total like way,
extreme
way on
example.
the other side of the spectrum from
He's an
what we're
extreme
seeing here.
example, and we're not going to talk about Bill Cosby,
Oh
who,
God.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like there are so many
Yeah.
high profile
Yeah.
examples that have surfaced through there. But the second half of my point
Yeah.
is
Sorry.
that it is daily. This bullshit with men is daily, and especially back then it was.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I do think it's better. I do think that men are more aware that, like, oh, it actually doesn't matter if I didn't mean anything by that
Yeah.
thing. Like, I should stop doing it because it makes women uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, it's not over. I still, you still have those experiences, but I think they're less frequent.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but they are still frequent. And so it's like you're comparing this, like, one in a million paranoia situation that is basically just, yeah, so it's less likely than getting into a car crash or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Definitely.
To just like the daily low grade, microaggressions and worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I also think it's notable in the report to the tenure committee, there's these other incidents mentioned that are not the things in the office, like
Talking about the quotes
yeah, the
from
quotes
Act
from,
Three.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 I wanted to talk about that
so
specifically because I think that's an interesting point. That comes up.
yeah,
Um, because we are not allowed to see what happened in class. We only see what happens in the office in these meetings, and obviously those things do come up as well. But yeah, it is interesting how it escalates, and also like what it implies about yeah, the world outside of the play, I guess. To me, that's definitely one of the interesting things about it because it's so minimal. It leaves a lot of room. And I do think also the movie version helped me to understand at least how Mamet is thinking about what's going on in between these meetings. We get like specific scenes of we see Carol getting her grade at the beginning, lining up, getting the grade, going to her like dorm room or something and looking at it and clearly being disappointed by it, like leading to her going to the office, right? It makes clear exactly what was the catalyst for her showing up, which I think the script of the play leaves more vague. She says like I want to talk about my grade, but like it's like she doesn't specifically say I just got the grade for my paper maybe or something. It's supposed to be, they say it's halfway through the semester. It's a little vague to me exactly what the timeline is here, but nonetheless, I think for a tenure committee thing it makes sense. It would be the spring, and they do reference like April or something at some point. So anyway, sorry, I completely lost what I was trying to say. uh
just the glimpses into,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we get William Hilliam at home after his like aggressive surprise party. Such an interesting note. That's such a mammoth thing to say. And we also get Carol like printing off these flyers for the group and putting a stamp, and she's now wearing this pin, and so we see her like basically activated, not just what she's doing to William Hilliam or John in the play, but other actions she's taking on
yeah,
behalf of the group. Like it gives you a little window into that. And then you also see John in a hotel room after Act Two. And like that implies something went on in his personal life, that he's like relegated to a motel. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's interesting. Like, I think I didn't appreciate that as much before when I watched this, that like, oh, there's an implication about like there must have been some kind of conflict at home, presumably over this thing happening. Like, I mean, they are buying a house. Obviously, there's stress. He talks about vaguely problems with his wife in
Yeah.
the first act, but like, I feel like we are definitely invited to view, especially from the movie version, because, there's a surprise party that it has something to do with this complaint to the tenure committee,
Yeah.
like why he's spending the night in a hotel room, and that also like has a significant plot element in terms of he doesn't know a certain thing has occurred because he didn't go home
Right.
for
Right.
like days. I guess they say 2 days or something like that. So yeah, maybe it was over the weekend or something. Anyway, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Um but yeah, anyway, I think that like is one of the big, I mean, I do actually just enjoy it being acted out because I think it does actually work fairly well. That's the other thing I was gonna say is the interrupting, characters interrupting each other is a hallmark of Mammoth dialogue.
Uh-huh.
And so, but I think it gets used in a really particular way here, that has an even stronger effect because of what the themes of the play are.
Yeah.
So like it's to me it's the apotheosis. I'm generally like a fan. I like David Mamet stuff. I liked it back then. I mean, that's why I watched this in the first place. House of Games, Homicide, Glengarry Glen Ross. I love all that stuff. And then there's some others that like Spanish Prisoner and Heist that I enjoy, but maybe don't like quite as much. But to me, like, I don't think he's ever been anything that has the like. I feel like in general his writing is kind of cold, because there's a really precise like way that the characters talk that it creates a kind of weird artificial distance, I think, and that's how I feel a lot of times. But I feel like in this play, like somehow the context or something like breaks through that, and I actually get quite a bit of emotion out of the story, more so than I usually feel when I watch Mammoth, where it's more like kind of a interesting cold exercise and like a unique way of speaking that I find very like pleasant to listen to, because you just don't, I don't know, there's something, it's not it's it was I know when like Tarantino started, like, which is roughly around this time, he was compared a lot to Mamet because he also had characters like spoke in this really particular way that probably to a degree goes back to the way the author speaks, if you hear Mamet speak, like he does kind of speak like this, and so like it makes sense that that's how it comes out. But I think that individuality, I mean, to me, that's something I like about any kind of like creative work. Like it's the spice that makes things interesting, the individual perspective and like personal things that that are not just generic things that work. I don't know, to me that's a big part of why I enjoy this thing, and I will cite specific examples later. But I think that I was just so overwhelmed by that, and to me the power of the drama, the reversal that happens, is just classically solid. you know when you get to that third act, like you were talking about how Carol doesn't talk that much in the first act, which is true. She talks a whole lot in the third act.
Yes. Yeah.
And he doesn't talk very much in the third
Yeah.
act.
Yeah.
um,
It's very much the reversal,
yeah.
and it drives home, to me, one thing it drives home is um the role of a certain type of dialogue or a certain type of language to kind of shut down other people,
Yeah.
which is not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, one more. Oh, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
well, just and we can talk about this stylistically as we go through, but the way that he responds to her in Act 3 is very much mirroring the way that she responds to him in Act 1.
Yeah,
Like Act 2 is more of a transition,
yeah.
but
He's still posturing in Act Two
uh,
for sure.
yeah,
Act Three is where it really flips. Like Act Two is more like a balance, and then it goes the
mhm,
other way in Act Three. It's kind of a shift in
yeah,
that direction. So yeah. Yeah, so the thing I was gonna say is so he in this interview, like he told the story of what like the genesis of this was, which was like he knew this professor who met with a student, and afterwards the student talked to her advisor, and the advisor concluded that there was sexual harassment and reported it to the university. And this is what he said, for the record. He said that the student didn't believe that it was sexual harassment and tried to tell the university, I don't actually consider this sexual harassment, you don't need to pursue a charge. But this advisor kept pressing ahead, and the interviewer were like, so you were sympathetic to the professor who's your friend who's coming to you? And he was like, yeah, well, when you give sympathy to someone, you are putting aside the fact that there could be another side to the story. And he was like, and that's worth considering, but that wasn't the time to do that. And I think what he was saying was that in a way, like this was a way to think about the other side of that story, I guess.
mhm.
Like how something like that could happen. And of course he simplified it because I think dramatically it works better if it's the student generating the thing instead of having this third advisor character who's the one instigating things and who wasn't even in the meeting,
Right.
just heard a
The
description of it.
group kind of
The
fills
group
in
fills the
the
role.
role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he wanted to talk about campus
yeah,
radicals. Clearly he's got like a
yeah,
grudge against them.
yeah. It's
As sort of a taking in these young impressionable minds that
mhm.
are adrift and looking for purpose, and turning them into
Yeah,
monsters.
I certainly think, and I don't, when I was 20, I don't think that I did. But I certainly now in my ripe old age, feel that there's a lot of value in slowing down and considering things from many points of view and trying to hold multiple truths, like the idea that someone in that story, that the professor could have behaved in a way that he thought was simply nurturing in
Yeah,
sort of a parental way,
yeah, which
and that
is part of the
the
play too.
yeah, and that the student could have not seen anything wrong with that, and the professor could have seen something with her, I assume her
Yeah, 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 yeah,
level of perspective, seen something inappropriate, sexually
yeah,
inappropriate. Like,
yeah,
things can be sexually inappropriate without the person they are done to realizing it.
yeah, yeah. Totally,
And so
totally.
obviously I have no idea what happened, but I
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah,
that all three of those perspectives can be right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that sometimes we only have really blunt instruments to surface what the issue is.
yeah,
I made a joke a few days ago that if Mamet was if Mamet was experiencing the things that catalyzed the writing of this piece in this day and age, the play might not have been written because it would have just turned into like a screed on Twitter. And you telling that story reminds me of all of
you mean
these, like,
Ellen's ex?
Elon's ex. These in many cases debunked claims about professors losing tenure because of some Facebook post that they made.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
There was this obsession in, like 2021 of like spreading these stories about and it's just
yeah.
like Ugh, anyway.
From my understanding, professors do lose tenure pretty regular. Like it's not uncommon, but I think the most common reason a professor loses tenure is not publishing enough.
Yeah.
Like that's the simple. It just comes down to like, where's all your publications? Like you should
Hmm.
have already had 20 by now, and this isn't enough. Like I know someone specifically that happened to.
Yikes.
And and it's like, and I would consider this the research to be, I'm like, "Yeah, you didn't get tenure? What?" And it's like, yeah, a lot of times it just comes down to like they're crunching numbers and like, well, you didn't do enough. And like I think most of the time it's something simple like that.
Yeah,
Not
that's a
something
deleted scene from the plays that the tenure committee actually doesn't even care about Carol's claims. They just they're like, you know what, one book isn't enough.
yeah, one book won't cut it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not gonna do. You should have had at least 3 books by now if you want tenure. Come on. What's
Oh boy, tenure's wild.
It is
Um,
wild, and it is like access to this kind of unlimited power. I think Mamet is skeptical of that as well. And I also think like the way he described it was acknowledging that the story wasn't necessarily as simple as his friend was making it out to be, but
yeah,
he was inclined to be sympathetic in the moment
yeah,
because his friend was coming to him distraught about this thing, and it was like
yeah.
that's what I felt like I should do in
Well,
that
yeah.
moment.
I mean, I think that's the thing that you do as a human
Yeah.
is, I mean, I think we've all been there, somebody comes to you and you're like, ooh, sounds like you might have been in the wrong. But that's
Yeah.
just not the time to say
Definitely,
that.
definitely. And I think the other thing I just wanted to throw in generically is that like whenever he's asked about it, like whatever the play is, and I think the play does express a bias, like no doubt, and there are like there is an audience that hates Carol for sure. But he will refuse to say that. Like he will never he says no, there is no villain in this story. That's not what this is about. And like he describes it as a tragedy, and so I think like that's notable in terms of like what he intends the purpose to be, whether even though I think nonetheless like his internal biases come out, and there are some tropes in there, but I think like I guess my point is I think he's thoughtful enough to at least understand and give some serious consideration to points of view that are not his own. And I think that gets a degree of voice here. I mean, I think sometimes he does actually agree, but I think sometimes he just understands there's a point here. And I want to bring up some specific points from the lines where it's like the way people talk about what happens in the story, if you actually read the details, it's a little different.
Yeah.
It's not quite as incendiary as it appears to be on the surface, at least
Yeah.
in my opinion.
I mean, I think it invites a certain amount of confirmation bias. You pick up on the things that support what you already believe.
Yeah.
Um Polarizing works can do that.
Yeah, 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 and I think there's really a tendency in our modern times, which I understand. I mean, people like simple answers and stuff, like to say like thing good or thing bad, and like that's
Hmm.
like as far as you go with it,
Yeah.
And I think there should be room for like not having to like because I definitely felt defensive about it initially because I loved it so much. I hated the implication that it was implying some horrible things that I don't agree with because I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's not, no, it's not that, but I think, yeah, my over time with reflection and stuff, I came to terms with the fact that like I don't have to actually agree with everything about the play to like it. And to think there's value to it. And generally speaking, that there's value, there isn't inherently value to something that has like reflects some fucked up things about humans and what they believe and what they do to each other and stuff, but like it can be so I like Shakespeare. There's some shit in Shakespeare that's like real fucked up, but that doesn't mean I don't think there's value to the plays. And so obviously that's a lot older, but I don't know, Clint Eastwood, I like some of Clint Eastwood's work. His politics are not mine. I don't think they're maybe as bad as Mamet's, but still it's not my cup of tea. um and but I think when when you are challenged with a point of view like this that actually is rampant, I mean, this fear, this paranoia, this attitude was, I mean, perhaps at its apex at this time,
Yeah.
that it was written, but it's catching something that's real and that I think is worth like grappling with, even if you don't fully agree with the way that the play frames it or the way Mamet wants to think about it. Like, I still think it's catching something that's like interesting and that you don't have to take away what he wants you to take away. If there's something in there, you know, that you can grab onto and that works for you, like it can be, it can be reframed in certain ways. That's something I'm going to try to do here because I do feel like there's actually a lot in here to counter some of the more obvious negative interpretations of the story, if not fully counter, because I agree it's still there. I'm not going to try to erase it completely, but I think there are some mitigations of that are worth considering, and that if anyone is cheering on the beating at the end, I think that says more about them than about the play. I don't think the play invites you to cheer that on. It doesn't feel that way to me.
No, I agree.
So, that you could have, that could be a play. I just don't think this is that one.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, that's the last general thing I want to say.
Okay.
Shall we dive into some
Yeah, I think it's
specifics?
about time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's do that.
we do
Let's do
that.
that. All
This
right.
Yeah, so before we sorry, before we even get into Act One, there's these two little quotes that surprised me, and I'm not sure I understand why they're here. The first one from The Way of All Flesh, yeah, it's just talking about young people have a marvelous faculty of either dying or adapting themselves to circumstances. Even if they are unhappy, very unhappy, it is astonishing how easily they can be prevented from finding it out, or at any rate, from attributing it to any other cause than their own sinfulness. So, it seems to be specifically about sort of disadvantaged children, quote unquote.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. The want of fresh air does not seem much to affect the happiness of children in a London alley.
uh, yeah. So, thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, there is this economic dimension to the conflict, which I think gets steamrolled in the popular discourse by the gender conflict
Right.
that is also there, no doubt. But I do think it's a significant thing that gets is it continues to be talked about throughout, and
Hmm.
the whole framing of like, I'm gonna get tenure and I'm buying this house. There is this economic aspect to his side of the story as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
Yeah, this line about him getting to send his kid to private school,
yes.
and the white man that's perfectly line.
Yes. Yes.
There's also this weird thing in Act One where she like the way she reacts, and this was really prominent in the movie, when he says, "I'm not your father," the
Hmm.
way she reacts, and it kind of freezes the air.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that act, and she's like, why would you say that?
Yeah.
Um, and then she is on the verge of making this confession
Hmm.
of I'm bad,
Yeah.
and then we don't find out because he's such an asshat that he goes and answers the phone and then forgets that she was about to tell him this thing she'd never said before.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was an allusion to some kind of prior sexual assault or something. This connection between people who are victims of sexual assault or sexual violence thinking that they are bad.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then this other quote, which gives us the name of the play, which, God, I really
Hmm.
had no idea.
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't.
never stated in the actual play.
Yeah, I was not familiar with this folk song. Oh, to be an Oleanna, that's where I would rather be than be bound in Norway and drag the chains of slavery. Um, I don't know, this idea of and the song I think is supposed to be satirical.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
this
Yeah.
I think so. I think that's what I read. But this idea of sort of a fictional fantasy place. Um,
Hmm.
perhaps perhaps higher ed as
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or that like liberal arts shining city on a hill
What
idea.
well, yeah, what the ideal is, I
Mhm.
guess. Maybe that's the point. Yeah, it's interesting. It's not 100% obvious. But I think you're referencing the I'm bad thing for the first quote is good because I didn't come up with anything that specific, but that uh prevented from finding out their unhappiness or at any rate attributing it to any other cause than their own sinfulness. Like,
Yeah.
it does seem like that's directly relevant to that little moment, which to me is like one of the most frustrating and interesting parts of the whole play because you get to a certain point where you feel like you're gonna have this great connection. They're gonna like really bond. She's gonna like confess this thing that she's like, I never told anyone this,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh my God, like yikes. And it seems like she's so like it seems like she's getting something out of that. Like she's feeling connected in
Yeah.
that moment. The way it was played in the movie was definitely like this. And yeah, what you're saying is like it has been often speculated as like something in the background. I mean, the play doesn't tell you, so you really have no way to know. But I guess yeah, inferring from the way she behaves.
Yeah.
Um,
And these lines later where she's like, you have no idea what it cost me to come
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um yeah. I think your point is interesting about how yeah, it's like the Act 1 at the end of Act 1, there's still room for the audience to think that this might be like a stand and deliver
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah, yeah,
story.
totally,
Um,
totally. Mr. Holland's Opus,
yeah,
okay.
and it's just
Dead Poets Society.
definitely not.
Yeah, because there are a lot of stories of teachers having bonds with students. There was the holdovers, what was it called? Something like that. The
Yeah,
Paul Giamatti
I
one.
yeah,
Uh,
there's so many. It's a well-trodden road in
yeah,
drama. Um, and I think he it if he could have set aside his own ego, which is impossible to imagine,
clearly.
maybe it could have been like maybe there was something there that could have evolved into genuine support and mentorship. But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely there's so many ways that it's going wrong.
it's very much going wrong. I want to point out many such ways.
Yeah, well, with
Um,
with that, should we segue into Act One
sure,
for
sure.
real?
Yeah, we can do that. We can totally do that.
Um,
Yeah, so
just don't be on a private phone call when your student's in your office. Ask him to wait outside.
this long monologue that opens things this is the kind of thing that must be like I mean, I'm not an actor and I don't want to be an actor, and if you've ever heard me act
You
you
would
know why.
be a terrible actor.
But like to me this seems like one of the hardest things to memorize because it's like all of these incomplete sentences. There's sort of this implied other person speaking on the phone, but we only get his half of it, so it's just all of this like you know incomplete thoughts, and it's not really clear what the point you get some vague stuff, you know um something about I mean it has to do with the house, clearly some dispute about the final negotiations for this house that he's gonna
But
buy.
is any of it even real in the end? Like, is it already just like trumped up for the surprise party?
Oh right, yeah, no,
That's the thing that I keep
we're
forgetting with
we're
this. Is
led
like
to
there's
believe
actually
that's what it
not.
is,
Yeah,
but what they're actually trying to do is pull him home to do a surprise party, and so they're trying to invent
yeah.
these. Yeah, no, you're right, it's actually not real, but that is when we enter the play, that's what we think we're listening to,
Right, right.
you know.
Yeah.
And so it comes across like, I mean, that's what they're playing, you know, on the other side of the phone. Like
Yeah.
that's what that's the thing they're trying to project. And obviously eventually it escalates to a point where it's a fucking surprise party, okay? Can you please come home?
Yeah.
um so anyway, yeah, the uh um uh uh the thing I noted here right away is um uh like immediately when they actually start interacting, like they're already talking past each other. Like
Yeah.
it's like, what is a term of art? I'm sorry, what is a term of art? Is that what you want to talk about? To talk about, let's take the mysticism out of it, shall we? Like, you know, like they're immediately like not connecting.
Yeah.
Like she's trying to ask a question, and then like I love this part where um right
Like he's already smug though with that. Let's take the mysticism out of it, shall we?
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
he's
yeah,
already smug right off the
yeah.
bat, and yeah.
When you have something which must be broached, don't you think? Don't I think? Hmm. Did I? What? Did I say something? No, I'm sorry. No, you're right. I I specifically wrote that.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you're right. No, you're right about what? Like she didn't actually say anything. It's like, anyway,
Yeah, but it's like he's just very happy for an opportunity to be, uh,
to
pedantic.
go into professor mode,
Yeah,
100%. And I love this. He defines the term of art, and then she's like, "You don't know what it means."
right. He's like that. I believe is what a term of art would be. Yeah, it's funny. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, I love it. I'm not sure that I know what
He's
it
like, you don't do
means.
that. What everybody forgets me. Yeah, but yeah, Carol is so odd in this opening scene.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think it's interesting that her first line is, "What is a term of art?" You know, so I do feel like there's a subtext here that I'm inclined to believe based on the way the play develops that um uh that she is actually a curious person,
Yeah,
and that she does have great capacity to learn. I mean, I feel like that is illustrated by what happens with the group and what you're saying. Like
yeah,
she ingests this theoretical framework in like, I don't know, a week maybe at the most, 2 weeks. I'm not really sure how much time passes here, but I don't think it's a ton of time. Um, and so anyway, I feel like this does kind of indicate that like she's interested, like,
yeah.
oh, what's this, what does that mean, you know? And that perhaps it's the way the class is conducted, the way the books are written and so on, that's like a stumbling block.
Right.
But that she would be fully capable, and actually in act 3 she shows that she does understand what a lot of his points are about, and you know, turns them around on him basically.
Right, right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it could have gone differently. It wouldn't have been a play, but reading it now, it's like, well, maybe she has now in this era of things like growth mindset and dyslexia, we just understand learning in a different way.
yeah,
And but he kind of gets at like it may be that you have some kind of a psychological block to understand like that this content is not out of your reach, but you may be telling yourself a
yep,
story about yourself as a learner.
yep.
And it's like that's not a bad thing to say, but he's making it about himself right off the bat. And there's no
Yeah.
listening. He just doesn't listen. And he introduces this idea of humiliation, that not
Oh yeah.
understanding something. um Ugh, God, his language is so off-putting.
Um, I have no desire other than to help you, but I won't even say but.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, I'm very amused by that. Yeah, so the next thing I noted down, which to me, this thing where he says, sit down, and then he reads from her paper. I think that the ideas contained in this work express the author's feelings in a way that he intended based on his results. And then he says, what can that mean?
Mhm.
Do you see? So, um,
It's a
yeah,
pivotal line.
all y'all out there, nah, that's not the way to critique students' work.
Right.
Please don't ever do that.
Right.
I've found myself wanting to say stuff like that. It's not helpful. Don't do it. You're just going to make them feel bad.
Yeah.
And it's not a place from which learning happens.
Right.
There's a way to talk about, things that can be improved that doesn't, like, and she
Yeah.
says it later directly, like, you said I was stupid when you said this thing.
Yeah.
That's how she
And he's
took
like,
it.
that's not what I said. But that
Yeah.
is basically what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's already introduced earlier on that page. He said, before she's even said anything, he says, I think you're angry.
Yeah.
And she says, why would I? And of course, he's cutting her off constantly. And
Constantly.
what she's trying to say is, I'm from a different socioeconomic background. I am having trouble with this content. I'm having trouble understanding your book. And he's just saying, I think you're angry. And one thing throughout the book, I think even in Act 3, um, is that he refers to his own thoughts and what he thinks and what she feels. And I made a note of this as just a classic Enlightenment era sexism that men think and women feel, whereas
Okay.
feelings are cognitive processes in the same way that quote unquote thoughts are.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those um low grade sexisms that is everywhere in this play and in society.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing it here. Like she's got a legitimate gripe, like, hey, you're my teacher. It is literally your job that is buying this house for you. And she says this later in
Yeah.
Act 3 when she's, you know, real
Letting him
self
have it.
actualizing or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, that, the job that is paying for your house is for you to help us understand these things.
Yeah.
And he's just saying, I think you're angry, implying, because you didn't get the grade that you wanted. But she's not storming in here with some just like, I want an A.
No.
She's storming in,
I
or
want to
she's,
learn.
yeah, I want
That's
to learn.
really her position here. And it's like, to me, that's what you want. And I do think he's pulled in. It's an interesting question I wanted to ask, like, later in the act, like, why does he stay? He gets so many opportunities to leave, you know?
Because it strokes his ego.
I think so. I think
That's
that is a part of
absolutely
it.
why
He
he
ends up
stays.
really, and so it's like when he says he loves teaching in Act Two, I think it's true. It might be egotistical, but I do think he enjoys that process, and that's why he is led to stay there,
I
like
think he
way
loves being
beyond.
listened to.
Sure, sure.
I think he loves having a captive
Yeah,
audience.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I
I
wouldn't
mean, I think that's what he views as teaching, shall we say?
indeed,
Like when
indeed.
he says that, I think that's what he means. And I think it's sort of illustrated by the way he behaves. Also, in terms of anger, if we're going to talk about characters showing anger in this play, I mean, physical violence has got to be one of the most extreme forms of anger that humans can do. And he's the only one who does that in this play.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I
Yeah,
think
maybe
he's not
foreshadowing.
immune from emotional outbursts.
Yeah.
Very much not. Uh,
Also, man, turn your phone, just leave your phone off the hook.
I know.
It's so, oh my God.
Yeah,
That's really evident watching it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. At the end, there's this thing. I guess this is a thing they do for plays where it says sound effects, phone ringing.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the only sound effect.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess if you're gonna stage it, you need to have that sound effect ready because it plays a significant role in the
Yes.
in the drama.
Yes.
Um, So yeah, the other thing I was gonna say, referring to those later citations, because I think those later citations of stuff he said in the class are interesting. I've gone round and round about them. I'm not sure if they're an earlier draft thing that got lost in the shuffle, or if they're an indication of time passing between the meetings during which the notes are taken as a part of um, the group. Like
Oh yeah.
you better write down everything he said.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
imagine something like that.
That makes sense.
Or the other idea I had, which actually comes here from Act One, there's this part. Um, no, yeah, where she says, "I did what you told me. I did everything that I read your book." I love this. I love this thing that she keeps saying. It's so like, I did. I'm doing all the right things. Why am I fail? It makes no sense. Like I'm here to do the stuff that I'm supposed to do, and I'm doing it all. Like, how is this possible? Isn't this like monumentally unfair? Like, I totally
Yeah.
understand this. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I just love that whole thing. You told me to buy your book and read it. Everything you say, she gestures to her notebook.
Yeah.
And so to me, like when I read that, I was like, oh, so another way to take those citations later is she just writes down everything he says. And that includes those comments,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but like she's just being very extremely thorough. Like her notebook is a central thing in the play, and
Yeah.
like it becomes about like it means what I want it to mean. But I think at this stage, the way I'm taking it is she's just being very literal. I'm gonna write down everything because I think everything is a part of this class, and what I'm supposed to do is like take notes on things. And so she also writes down like little comments he makes to students in the class. Anyway, so I feel like it could be that, or it could be the group influence. I'm not really
Yeah.
sure. But when I read that, it stood out to me when she literally says everything you say, and gestures to her notebook.
Uh-huh.
Like to me,
Yeah.
that feeds
Yeah.
into that idea. And then another thing from that same page. So I guess he gets another call. Um, and he says, "You tell me what you want me to do. You tell me what you want me to." And she says, "How can I go back and tell them the grades that I?" So it just stood out to me because she says them
Uh-huh.
here. I'm not, her parents like are like I'm not 100% sure who she means here. It's a bit vague, and something people have pointed out that I think is more true in the play than in the movie version actually, because the movie version does give us some stuff with her outside of the meetings, but that we get more of John. We get he has a wife, he has a son,
Yeah.
he's buying this house.
Yeah.
There's this guy Jerry. You know, there's all this like out of the office life that he has, but with Carol, it's vague. Like you don't get a lot of access to.
Right.
There's insinuations. She talks about the economic background, but she never talks about her parents. She doesn't talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's left vague, and so I just thought it was interesting that how can I go back and tell them the grades that I'm like, oh, there's an
Yeah.
implication here of like some figures lurking in the background that like she's going to be ashamed to
Yeah.
tell them if she got a bad grade, and like that's like part of what's going on other than just her personal
Yeah. Yeah.
desire to do the things that you're supposed to do and succeed the way you're supposed to succeed in
Yeah.
higher education.
Yeah, and then that segues into her raising these arguments that he makes in his book about about education being which are it's such a privileged position to have to express this attitude about education as being virtual warehousing of the young, and this and she's starting to this is she actually gets to express a thought here that there are people, and clearly she is among them, who have come to the university to be bettered,
Yeah.
and that involves learning and like to get on in the world, we have to learn, and then then she ends up with this idea of like feeling like she's stupid and thinking that he thinks she's stupid too, and then she called him stupid.
Mhm.
So yeah, I forget why I brought that up, but
I mean, it seems relevant, but maybe it'll come up later. Um, yeah, so I just on the next page, I wanted to read a couple of speeches because to me, like these speeches were the ones where I was like, I've heard this exact thing. So the first one was, I mean, not quite as nicely written or or eloquent or what have you, but anyway, um, no, there are people out there, people who came here to know something they didn't know, who came here to be helped, to be helped. So someone would help them to do something, to know something, to get, what do they say, to get on in the world. How can I do that if I don't, if I fail? But I don't understand. I don't understand what anything means. And I walk around from morning till night with this one thought in my head: I'm stupid. So that's the first one. And then the second one from the next page is nobody tells me anything. And I sit there in a corner in the back, and everybody's talking about this all the time, and concepts and precepts and what in the world are you talking about? And I read your book and they said, fine, go in that class because you talked about responsibility to the young. I don't know what it means and I'm failing. I to me,
Yeah.
like I'm like, oh my God. Like
Hmm.
I think, my thing is math, so I don't, it doesn't quite come up like this. The way math, like anxiety is expressed is a bit different. But I still feel there's something in common here, especially because math is perhaps even more of a technical way of communicating than this like super academic speak that's going on in this context. I mean, I guess that's debatable, really, but nonetheless, it has that in common. And so, like, what I normally hear is something like, "I've always hated math. I've always been bad at math. It's always been my worst sub." I mean, I've heard that so many times. It's like
Yeah.
at this point, I've like sort of adapted to like a particular way that I respond to it, which is mostly to like not respond to it because I think like that is a psychological trap. Like telling yourself, and this is something they talk about later, like telling yourself you're bad at something, repeating to yourself that you're stupid and you don't understand is actually making it
Yeah.
worse. And that doesn't mean it's not a natural human reaction to have. I think it is. I felt that way too. I understand how you get to that point, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just frustrating to be in in that position so many times where it's like you understand that they're having a reaction. It isn't easy to say anything that's going to make that like go away. It's already been so ingrained, you know,
Yeah. And
by the time they get to you.
there is this thing that I think has a lot of currency in certain intellectual circles of using this vocabulary and phraseology to talk about things that are pretty accessible and everyday, but to
Yeah.
kind of apply a vocabulary to understanding them in a different way. And people just kind of like, I deeply sympathize with this feeling of like, being totally lost. Like, what is it? What everybody's talking like they all understand what you're talking about. What the fuck are you talking about? And, she's already getting at his one aspect of his hypocrisy, which is writing about the responsibility to the young, but not taking responsibility for the learning of the young as a teacher.
Yeah, there's like a
Um,
irony there, I guess.
but yeah, and it's funny because it also makes me think about, earlier on when she's like, what's a term of art? And he kind of has to admit, though he doesn't have he's not abashed about it, that like he's actually not even sure
Yeah.
the meaning of this word that he's using. And I think there's a lot of that in higher ed. People just like, oh yes, absolutely, precepts and concepts, but it's like, what does that mean? If you ask people like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Just try it sometime. And like later when he says paradigm, and she's like, what does that mean? It's like, well, why don't you just say the simple
Yeah, yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's
If
this
you
like
lose
particular
nothing,
type of hypocrisy of using the vocabulary, the elitist vocabulary of higher education to talk about egalitarian values.
yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Which is the thing. I mean, that part of hypocrisy of higher education is definitely one of the targets of
Yeah,
this story.
definitely.
Um, but yeah, um but yeah, no, and everybody's talking about this all the time. It's just such a, it's just such a great line.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
that's that's such a classic Mammoth thing. Like not like talking around things, incomplete sentences, and like a kind
Um,
of speech that's sort of an artificial naturalness, you know,
yeah.
because people do speak in a halting way and they do make incomplete sentences and so on, not so artfully,
Yeah.
but you know, still like it's sort of a heightened version of that, I
Yeah.
guess I would say. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think the the concept of what he wants to talk about is also something I didn't fully appreciate in the earlier day, like how relevant it is, I guess, to like what ends up happening
Yeah.
overall. How it does make all that stuff like kind of laughable. It's like, wow, you don't have any because you know. I love theory as much as anyone does, but I think we all gotta acknowledge that like the main reason why like we study things and try to learn new things is like because we want to do something with them, like they're supposed to be help us do things in the world, like
Yeah.
that is the idea. And like you know what is isn't it bizarre to talk about education in this particular way while also not just upholding it but even perpetuating or not in any way addressing the problem that you're talking about in your own
Yeah.
practice. I mean, it's like the very least you could do.
Yeah.
um but also in terms of vocabulary, I think that's another thing. If you can say the thing in a way that loses no meaning but that more people understand, you should say it that way.
Yeah.
That is something that I try to do, you know, use the least technical and if I must use technical vocabulary, explain what it is, what it means, and why I'm using it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think it has a purpose.
Yeah.
It's not clear here that it does.
Yeah. I do use the word paradigm, so maybe.
So do I. I like words, you know,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, and so if I could move us slightly forward, here we have the first instance in which he persuades her somewhat against her will, to sit down so that I want to talk at you might be more apt. And then uh what? I don't what? I want to tell you a story about myself. Good, great. So yeah, so he's got her sitting down.
yeah.
Um, she was wanting to leave, but he gets her to sit down. He proceeds to tell a story about himself, which begins empathetically. Like, I have this voice in my head. I grew
Mhm.
up being told that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't smart
I
enough.
think he's trying. I
I
think
think
he's
he's trying.
it's like he is so wrapped up in himself that it still comes across as selfish, but like I think in his way he's trying to be
Yeah,
sympathetic.
yeah. I agree. And then this airplane analogy, this pilot,
Oh yeah.
and the
That's more or less what I was saying. Or
yeah,
you know, like that idea of like telling yourself you're a failure is actually making it worse.
yeah, yeah.
um
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna bring up, so like part of the play is gonna be, this is me going, don't fucking do
Yeah.
this. So here's the first one I got for that topic. He says, or okay, let's see. Um, uh, right. Um, he says, well, I don't know. If I put it that way, meaning, is that what I have? Oh, right. He's talking about, yes, telling yourself you're incapable of learning. Um, and she says, is that what I have? And he's, well, I don't know if I put it that way. Listen, I'm talking to you as I talk to my son.
Yeah.
because that's what I'd like him to have that I never had. I'm talking to you the way I wish that someone had talked to me. I don't know how to do it other than to be personal.
Yeah.
But, and then she says, why would you want to be personal with me? And he says, well, you see, that's what I'm saying. We can only interpret the behavior of others through the screen, and then the phone rings.
Hmm.
And because of that, he actually doesn't get to clarify the point. And I think if you're going to say some shit like that, you
Yeah.
need to be real clear on what you mean
Yeah.
and make sure you're putting up a boundary there, because you can, like, this can easily go wrong. And of course, it does go wrong. And there are things he does that are worse than this. But like, to me, this was the first time where I'm like, ooh,
Yeah.
not just being pompous, not just interrupting her, but like crossing a line,
Yeah.
or at
And
least
then,
starting to cross a line.
yeah, yeah. And so then he answers the phone again, just repeatedly throughout here. Just don't answer the phone. Leave it off the hook. Because this, as you're saying, like you're opening all these cans of worms. The next thing that he says about this, well, yeah. Did you want to keep going with your all the things wrong with this, page 18?
Yeah. So
Everyone has problems.
I was going to, yeah, talk about. To me, like, this is actually one of the worst things, which is, she says, why did you stay here with me?
Yeah.
And he says, stay here, yes, when you should have gone. And this gets right to the point I was making earlier. What is his response to that? He gets a chance to address that question. He says, because I like you. And it's like, okay, no. So what I wrote down was, because it's my job. I want my students to succeed, et cetera, et cetera. This is what you fucking say. Maybe you do like the student. I won't deny that I like some students more than others. That is natural. You don't say it to them.
Yeah.
You never say that to them. You do your best to treat them fairly, despite the fact that you feel, slightly more inclined to like some of them than others. Some people you get along with better than others. That's just the way people are. It's fine. You shouldn't let that interfere your work, and you definitely shouldn't ever tell a student, I'm staying with you because I like you. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care what you mean by that. Don't say it.
Yeah. Don't say it.
What is wrong with you?
Don't say it.
Like, seriously, what the fuck? To me, that's just like way, way, way over the line. And yeah, like, I feel like, yeah, at this point we're at a stage where I understand a tenure committee going, nah, if that's how you're going to behave with your unlimited power, then it's a good thing we got the chance to say no,
Right.
because like, if you feel entitled to do this before you have this sort of absolute security, I don't know, like, to me, like, I mean, we can talk about the other stuff later. Like, I think to a certain extent that goes too far, but like, I think the idea that the tenure committee like takes this seriously is not unreasonable,
Yeah.
because like, this is stuff that if you know,
It's
they'll
bad judgment.
very bad judgment, and you'll get trainings. They have I have to do that every year. This would be an example of something they would say, do not say this ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not okay. Um, okay. Um, all right. So, uh,
Yeah. Well, and then we got, I mean, it's going to keep escalating. This, like, you said everyone has problems. Everyone has problems. Do they? Certainly. Well, you're perfectly right. If we're going to take off the artificial stricture of teacher and student, why should my problems be any more a mystery than your own? And it's like, well, she hasn't actually. Yeah, and then he mentions problems with his wife.
mhm.
Ugh.
He
Yeah.
just slides that in there, and it's like, you didn't need to mention that either.
No,
If you want to say you have
just
problems, you
don't.
should be
Keep it
generic
to
about it.
Yeah, just keep it. I mean, and then he goes into his actual point again,
Yeah.
back to talking about himself and this idea of this like fear of failure, um and teaching, and oof, oof. Um and then and this idea of um assessments being inherently bad because they don't actually, so we're sort of back to talking in the theoretical. Like, I'm in education. I've read a lot of these critiques about assessments and about the power dynamics with this. And it's like this scene and this play in general kind of underscores the gap between um, what what it means to kind of critique these systems of education and then what can be some of the pitfalls when you actively erode them without taking a bigger read on what that means. So
Hmm.
like breaking down the artificial stricture of teacher and student, like that is taking away a boundary that, as you point out, serves a function. And
Yeah.
it is artificial, and also like a lot of policy and other things, it's there to protect
Yeah.
people. Not everything about it is bad.
In a way, both parties, I
Yeah,
think, are
absolutely, both
protected by
parties.
that
I mean, I think
boundary.
this play drives that home.
Yeah, totally. Um,
And then, here is introduced another big piece of his hypocrisy of relevance to the play, talking about the bad tenure committee and
mhm.
dismissing the dismissing any validity of the process of tenure um when he thinks he's gonna get it.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna reference the speech right before that. If I fail all the time, this is John. If I fail all the time, it must be that I think of myself as a failure. If I do not want to think of myself as a failure, perhaps I should begin by succeeding now and then. Look, the tests you see, which you encounter in school and college and life, were designed, for the most part, by for idiots by idiots. There is no need to fail at them. They are not a test of your worth. They are a test of your ability to retain and spout back misinformation. Of course, you fail them. They're nonsense. Okay, so
Misinformation. I didn't even
yeah,
I missed it.
yeah. So when I read that, my response was, I think there's two layers to this speech. Number one, I think Mamet believes this. It feels very genuine to me, but I think he also thinks John's a hypocrite for saying this.
Yeah, yeah,
Because, like, look at where you're standing here, like,
yeah,
isn't that a weird thing to say? Like, from your point of view, like,
yeah,
really?
for
I
sure.
don't know, but I think there is validity to it, and that is one of the frustrating things about higher ed. Like, you have to engage in the conventions of how it works and the way evaluation works and so on. And like, it is kind of stupid. Like, I don't love it. I'm not happy that that's the way I got to do it. I don't necessarily have a great way to do it instead, but like, I know the way we're doing it now isn't great. So I think like you know, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say misinformation, but like, I get like the ability to retain a spout back. I agree with completely.
Oh, yeah,
Like that is a big part of what we're asking them to do, and that
yeah,
is silly. Like, why is that? Why is that the ultimate thing that determines the thing that society says matters? About this education. It doesn't really care about the knowledge or experience or even just devoting yourself to learning. It's like these numbers or these letters and how we can boil it down to what your worth is numerically. And
hmm,
like that's just really, it's awful. So anyway, like I agree with that point, but you have to acknowledge that you're participating in this.
yeah,
And with like full acceptance of it. I mean, like that's part she's in here because of a grade. Like you,
yeah.
and now you're saying like it's stupid
Yeah,
and like okay then, and of course he does pivot from that to another point that I will be complaining about shortly.
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, let's do it. Let's go. Let's
Oh, you
keep going.
ready to
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so
Because I mean, I could talk that topic that you're talking about. I could talk about all day.
okay. um okay, so here it is. Oh, wait, what does it say? Oh, I get it.
Reading your own handwriting is harder than it sounds.
Um, uh, oh. Sometimes I don't
Okay.
even know
Well,
what
while
I'm
you're
pointing
while
to.
you're gathering your
Sorry.
thoughts,
Oh, I found it. I
okay,
found what I wanted. Okay,
let's hear it.
sorry. Well, there's like three things. So here I go. Okay. So the first thing was this thing. Uh, uh, I'll make you a deal. You stay here. We'll start the whole course over. I'm going to say it was not you. It was I who was not paying attention. Excellent grammar. We'll start the whole course over. Your grade is an A. Your final grade is an A. Carol, but the class is only half over. So anyway, that's a line that indicates where we are roughly.
Yeah.
Anyway, simultaneously with over, because of course he couldn't even let that sentence be
No.
completed. Your grade for the whole term is an A. If you will come back and
Ugh.
meet with me a few more times, your grade's an A. Forget about the paper. You didn't like it. You didn't like writing it. It's not important. What's important is that I wake your interest if I can and that I answer your questions. Let's start over. Okay, and then we get this stuff about like um what is the class
Mhm.
but you and me? There are rules. Well, we'll break them. How can we? We won't tell anybody. Okay.
Ugh.
Okay. No, you are already
Ugh.
on extremely thin ice. Never go, you get an A if you come meet with me. Of course, I believe he didn't mean it like that, but you
Right.
still don't fucking say it. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter how you mean it. You just
Right.
don't say, that's like
It's
so unethical,
he's
even if you
so
don't mean it as sexual harassment.
right. Right.
Like,
How about this? How about go to class and study? How
yeah,
about come to formal office hours and this
yeah,
is what we'll do?
yeah,
Like, oh my God, this we
yeah.
won't tell anybody.
Yeah, if
Oh
you
my
find
God.
these sessions helpful, you should keep coming. They're for all the students to benefit from. That's why I
It's
have them, you know? Like,
he's so blinded by his own ego.
it's almost like I'm glad you brought up stand and deliver. It's like he has a stand and deliver fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna have this thing, and I'm gonna take this like
Yep.
struggling student and turn her into a superstar.
Yep.
You know, that's like what he's
By putting
imagining.
my own theories into
Of
action, by
course.
eliminating these,
Yeah.
I'm gonna show. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. Not really recognizing what a horrible mistake that is and how subject that is to misinterpretation or indeed abuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But it's like, stand and deliver. I don't remember that well, honestly, but like
oh, I don't either. I
dangerous
just know, yeah,
minds and
dangerous
like that's a
minds.
woman.
Yeah.
That's a woman teacher.
Yeah.
It's different. It is different. The power dynamic is different.
It is definitely different. I mean, I
And
think,
it's groups. It's like this one-on-one thing. If he was saying this kind of shit on day one, because there's always that one professor on day one who's like, you're gonna call me John. There's
yeah,
no professor and student here. Everybody gets an
yeah,
A, or like this class, because of what this class is about. And I had a class, a progressive ed, constructivist ed class, where you could only take a pass fail. And it was this philosophical line that the professor drew of like, I can't teach a class that is critiquing assessment
mhm,
and all of this and also assess you. It's pass fail. If
yeah,
you've got a problem with that, you cannot take this class.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I will say, I mean, I think even for a female teacher, I mean, I think if you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
said, like, I agree the dynamic would be different and the ways in which it could be construed or um
Still don't do it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's my point. Like, I think it would still be a problem, just not necessarily in the same way because the world we live in.
Yeah.
But I would think anyone in this position should not be saying, "You get an A if you come meet with me."
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely unfair to all the other students.
It is
Plan.
100%. Like, it's like, yeah, setting aside how fucked up it is for this particular student, it's also fucked up for the rest of the class.
Yeah.
Like, what are they like? Do they get to come meet with you too and all get A's?
Yeah.
Like,
How about this? Here's an idea. How about you teach your
yeah, yeah, yeah,
class?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, uh, yeah, and then this thing that he says, and they played it up in the movie version too. Um, Carol says again, "Why would you do this for me?" He says again, "I like you. Is that so difficult for you to?" Carol says, and then John says, "There's no one here but you and me."
Oh, God.
And I'm like, and they played it up in the movie version. Like, it comes across as kind of sinister,
Yeah.
and it's like I don't think he really means it that way, but like again, get outside your own head. Like,
Yeah.
think for a minute how what you're saying could come across, and
Yeah.
like, please pay attention to the way you communicate. It really matters. Like, it is not like a small part of your job.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are you doing saying this? And another thing, I actually, on a related note, wanted to point about the movie version that comes across that isn't in the play. He kept closing the exit
Yeah.
doors, you know? And I'm like, yeah, there's, you know, again, I don't think he meant it that way, but it's like, and then at the end, he slams the door before he does a full-on physical assault.
Yeah.
And so it's like there is this like implied
Yeah.
intimidation.
Physical trappedness.
Yeah.
And never mind that the power dynamics create a sort of trappedness in her situation. Like if she's afraid that if she flunks out, then or if she does poorly in this class, then she could flunk out and then she'll be cut off from success. So there's already this like you have to play the game, but there is physical trappedness in the staging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the play version, it all takes place in his office.
Yeah. So that's the trap, you know, since there's like multiple rooms involved in the movie version, it's more
Yeah.
of like getting closed into this one place
Yeah.
at particular moments, and it happens several times. Another thing I wanted to mention on the next page, just as far as the notes go, we get another little bit about the notes.
Yeah.
Where she says, when you refer to hazing, you wrote in your book about the comparative. The comparative, she checks her notes. Are you checking your notes? Yes. Tell me in your own, I want to make sure that I have it right. No, of course, you want to be exact. I want to know everything that went on. So anyway, to me,
Yeah.
again, I also took that as an indication of how she's thinking about and using the notes. And so that also bolstered my idea that what really happened was she just literally wrote down everything he said in class because she wants to have it right and she wants to know everything that went on.
Yeah, there's also this arrogance of his that he wants to believe that everything he says is so interesting that people will be so riveted that they will just not only retain it all, but that requires them to understand it all as it's, his arrogance is
Yeah.
so extreme. And yet, we've all met this guy.
Oh, yeah. As real as Carol's complaints are about the class of stuff, yes. People like this in higher ed are rampant. It attracts this type.
Not that I think that all of those men would attack a woman with a chair.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
I do think everybody probably has a breaking point, but yeah.
Yes, I would like to believe
I just mean the arrogance.
Most of them
like
would have been,
passion for the sound of your own voice.
Yeah, and really being unable to distinguish between someone thinking what you're saying is interesting and just listening to you and repeating back what you say.
Yes, yeah.
Thinking those are the same thing. Okay. So
I just noticed I didn't underline this at first. I'm a heathen and I write in my books.
Oh yeah.
This
I'm post-it noting
this
here.
hazing thing. Just this line, it doesn't even matter, but out of context. When I find you've lied about having read the book, you'll be disgraced and your life will be ruined. It's just I didn't really realize that. A little bit of maybe foreshadowing.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I actually like this. I think this is like a funny way to frame like a book report. Like we shove this book at you, we say read it. Now you say you've read it, I think you're lying.
Yeah.
I've
definitely never had that happen.
I totally love that idea. Yeah. Like it's like and I guess I have particular sympathy for it because although I do enjoy reading, I actually had a lot of trouble with classes where we had extensive reading of literature required, and then we have to like go take tests about it or write papers about it or whatever. like I definitely resisted that mode
Yeah.
of teaching, and so like it was very satisfying for me to have someone frame this
Yeah.
like like
Your
they're
life will be ruined
it
when I discover that you
yeah.
used the Spark Notes to write this report.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and almost like it's a police interrogation or
Yeah, yeah,
something.
yeah. I'll
Like,
grill
oh,
you.
really? You read the book, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. We're
Yeah.
gonna find out.
What is that accent?
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's like
here's another.
NYPD Blue or something.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. So, like, okay, so just jogging ahead a little bit here. Another classic John move. He's like, as a favor to me, will you tell me without looking at your notes so that I can see if your idea is interesting?
Yeah.
And then she begins to, and of course he interrupts her. It's relentless, the interrupting.
Yeah.
He's like the walking embodiment of, well, actually.
Yeah. Right. So he yeah, I love this. Actually, yeah, this is something I want to bring up that's on that general topic. So she says, "You said justice." He says, "Yes." Then Carol says, "That all are entitled, John, yes, to a speedy trial."
Yeah, it's like he has no patience to even let her
He
formulate
really
her own
is.
thoughts. And so, how would, if you just come back to her fundamental challenge here, which is like, I'm not following this. Well, you need like a very powerful educational tool is to allow her to parse this out, to reconstruct these ideas.
Yeah.
And just he just can't
Yeah.
resist interrupting.
Yeah. Yeah, hot tip for all y'all out there. Something I've definitely noticed that works more than I would expect
Listening?
is, yeah, well, like being patient,
Yeah.
like wait. Sometimes I've had this experience many times where a student asks a question and either I get distracted, so I have to come back, or I just like point at something and pause for a second, and they get it
Yeah.
themselves.
Whereas he's doing the opposite here. So he gets so excited that she's like engaging with this idea
Yeah,
that he cannot stop interrupting her.
he can't let her
But
actually
he's
engage.
interrupting her to say, "That's great, speak up."
Oh my
Right?
god.
That's just like a fucking perfect
That's the part.
distillation.
That's the part I was specifically going to say because
Yeah.
to me this is the most hilarious illustration of that like particular thing that he does of the interrupting. Um, how can you say that? How good? Like
That's right, speak up.
she just said, "How can you say that?" Like it's like good. What speak up? What is prejudice and unreasoned belief? Blah blah blah. Carol, but how can you let us examine? Good. How good? When I'm speaking. So
Finally
finally, she sticks up for herself. And in the movie version, she drops this teacup. That's like a prop that's not in the play. That gives an extra bit of weight to the pause that happens there. Um, uh, and yeah, so finally, she gets the sentence out. How can you say in a college class that college education is prejudice?
Yeah.
um and which is I mean it really gets to a central point here. So then this leads to my next no, I think, did you talk about this already? I'm not sure. This story he tells.
I didn't, but this is obviously a big no-no
Yeah.
that's front and center in the complaint to the committee.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
But
I
yeah, real quick, I also think this idea that like, oh, it's your job to make me mad.
Oh, to provoke you. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's like, yes, but that's only part of it.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. You definitely need to
Do something with that provocation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
So yeah, listen,
This-
when I was young, somebody told me, "Are you ready?"
Are you ready? No,
What a
no
weird
one
thing to
is
say.
ready for this random. Oh God.
The rich copulate less often than the poor, but when they do, they take more of their clothes off. Years, mind you. I would compare experiences of my own to this dictum, saying, aha, this fits the norm, or ah, this is variation from it. What did it mean? Nothing, blah, blah, blah. That's the point he wants to make. Okay, he wants to say, this was just some bullshit that somebody said, and I let it take space in my head, and
Yeah.
it wasn't worth it. That's the point he wants to make. Okay, no, please, anyone in this situation, do not tell a story like this. Of course, he phrases it sort of impersonally, and he is like, not, he isn't, it's described as pornographic later, and I do think that's going too far. But implicit in the story is his own sexual experiences, and that is not something you want to be talking about to any student, let alone a female student in this context.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are you doing? Surely there's an example you could tell here of something to make the same point that doesn't require you to specifically reference your sexual history and
Yeah.
like what the fuck, unbelievable to
Yeah.
me.
If you don't have an example that doesn't involve you referencing your own sexual history, just don't even bring it
It's
up.
not, you could make the point vaguely, you know. Someone says this stupid thing and it gets stuck in your head and you find yourself repeating it and
Yeah.
and thinking about it, and it has this influence on your life that's like way beyond how much it actually means or matter, you know. Like, you can be vague about it if you don't have an example
Yeah.
that's like appropriate to tell here, but it's like, surely you can do better. Like, just never, just, oh my god.
Yeah.
Anyway, to me, like, beyond why are you staying here, because I like you, this is probably the other one that's like on top of like
Yeah.
shit he should not have said
Yeah.
in this first encounter.
Well, and we're barreling toward another thing that he should that
Oh, 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 and I love this because he's not even saying it to her. He
right.
is making a mental note because he thinks this thought is so fascinating and
Mhm.
cogent that he must record it for later, that he might develop it
Mhm.
in an academic context. And he feels that he should say this in front of her as well. He could have written this down. He doesn't. He verbalizes it.
Yep.
He says, we were talking of economic betterment. I was thinking of the school tax. Where is it written that I have to send my child to public school? Is it a law that I have to improve the city schools at the expense of my own interests? And is this not simply, quote, the white man's burden?
So this is interesting to me because of this is a very conservative idea that like a commitment to public education is considered a liberal value, and this idea that you shouldn't have to pay for public education if you want to send your kid to a private school, and that sending your kid to private school, that's a lower quality experience, educational experience, and that you're like doing it in order to be charitable. So it's interesting to me because it seems to be like I don't think Mamet thinks that this is a good attitude to have, but it is a conservative attitude.
Definitely.
And so for those of you who haven't just Googled this and just have like the general idea of this phrase as,
The white man's burden.
yeah, a racist justification for Western conquest, I will tell you, it was a Kipling
Mhm.
originally wrote it to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and then revisited it 2 years later to extort the American people to conquer and rule the Philippines. Conquest is portrayed as a burden that the white race must take up in order to help non-white races develop civilization.
Mhm.
Cute.
That is absolutely the way in which he's referencing the phrase.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So, yeah.
the idea that he thinks that this is like, A, that this is an interesting and important idea that he must note down, and B, that he should actually say this out loud is like unbelievable.
But I sort of feel like, there's this whole discourse in education about, you think of like savage inequalities, it's like Watershed book from the mid 80s, about public education and how it relates to redlining and economic inequality in our communities. The idea that a professor of sociology of education or whatever it is that he teaches would talk about this in this way. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting that it gets into this because, you know, there's not obviously a lot of like racial component to the story, but uh
Right, it's just these two white people.
typically, yeah, typically it's white people. But you know, I listened to a bunch
Yeah, I
of
guess it doesn't have
podcasts.
to be.
I listened to a bunch of podcasts about this, and I found one that I didn't do my research. I'm sorry, y'all. Full respect for what you're doing. I just didn't quite get around to doing the proper research. Anyway, it was this, I'm gonna say like theater troupe, or maybe it was a theater club, or maybe it was, I'm not sure. It might have been in an HBCU. It might not have been. Any of these things could be true or false. But what was true is it was a group of Black actors that were putting on this play, and they were talking about doing these parts, and how like there are some aspects of the play that read a bit differently, at least to them, when it's Black actors inhabiting the parts. And so the one thing the guy playing John said was that like he felt like there should have been, if it's a Black character in this role of the professor, that there should have been maybe a little more attention to this attainment of economic security, that like that thing as a ideal to strive for and like a central goal of life would have been very present and like informing his reaction later on, and that
Yeah.
he thought that, would have been pointed out. But I just
I
realized like that line would be interesting in that context. Like it would definitely have a different quality to have a Black
Yeah.
actor reading like sending my kids to public school is like the white
Mhm.
man's burden. Someone who's actually like so embedded in
Yeah.
this idea of striving to move up, the
When I think that
social ladder, that he's
yeah,
like
I think casting with
being
non
racist.
yeah, yeah. With a non-white cast, I would think, or at least a non-white professor. Also the line about education being like the dominant paradigm of education, the dominant model of education being primarily about memorization and recitation of misinformation
Hmm.
would also carry an additional,
Yeah.
because there's a whole like offshoot of like liberation theology informing pedagogy in among colonized,
Yeah.
Freire being like the most, probably the most celebrated one, but certainly in African American education circles,
Yeah.
there's that whole question of like, but what are we teaching
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Not simply being successful at the existing systems.
Yeah.
Although, of course, that's a generalization, and there's a broad range of thought um, in that
Yeah.
broad and diverse group of people.
Yeah. Like what you teach also means what you don't teach,
Yeah.
and choices are made. That actually comes up later.
Yeah.
Not exactly in that context, but still.
Yeah, I love that. I love that line in
Yeah.
the Act Three of like reframing book banning as like, well, somebody chose these
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you can choose them, someone
Others
else can choose
can.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a totally valid
And
point.
that also gets to that like the threat that people feel when power that they have taken for granted is offered to another
Someone
party, that it
else.
feels
Yeah.
like something is being taken away from them that they
Yeah.
just felt entitled to.
Yeah. 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 That is 100% there. Yeah, so the next thing I wanted to bring up is this moment. This is also like, oh God, don't do this. But Carol sort of has this breakdown. I think there's like psychological insight here. So I just wanted to mention this speech. Because it starts off with her yelling, I don't understand any of it, any of it. I'm smiling in class. I'm smiling the whole time. What are you talking about? What is everyone talking about? I don't understand. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means to be here. You tell me I'm intelligent, and then you tell me I should not be here. What do you want with me? What does it mean? Who should I listen to? Okay, he goes over to her and puts his arm around her shoulder. And this is in the play. I don't think this, it's played a little bit differently in the movie. But she says no, and she walks away from him, and then he goes shh. In the play, the like I said, the movie played this differently. No, I don't I don't know what you're saying. Shh. It's like, ooh, don't. This is where it does get kind of like paternal, I guess. Like I
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
that's the mode he's trying to go into
yeah.
here.
You're not comforting your
Like
son.
I'm comforting my son. Yeah, that's totally. But
Yeah,
it's like that is so out of line here. You can be verbal. It's okay. I understand. You can try to be comforting, but what going over and doing physical touch and shushing is just like
yeah.
just what what's wrong with you? don't do this. Like, it's like, oh my God. Okay. And then that segues into the big moment to me, like the pivotal moment of Act One, which is this thing where she's like, I can't tell you. No, you must. Oh God, I can't. No, tell me.
Ugh.
It's like, I don't really say it like that, but it's still like, why are you talking? Like, just don't, like, what you said, you don't have to tell me. It's okay. Like, like, don't, no, you must. Are you serious? Anyway, she says, I'm bad. And then she says, oh God. And he says, it's all right. And then um after some back and forth, um, she finally says, I'm having trouble turning the page here. Here we go. She finally says, um, I always, all my life, I've never told anyone this, all of my life. And then the phone rings. So it's like, there's such a great ellipsis here. And I think this is the part where I feel the fact that it's a tragedy the most, because it's it's a moment where it feels like the characters could, where we could turn into Dead Poet Society, or
Yeah.
um Stand and Deliver, or whatever, like where they have this big bonding moment, and the student like overcomes her psychological hangups of like succeeding in the class, and is able to thrive because of this inspirational professor that took a personal interest, and like she confesses this deep dark secret or whatever it is. We're invited to feel that way here, I
Hmm.
think, and I think they play it that way in the movie version too, where it's like it feels like a great um, moment of connection is about to transpire, and then the phone
Yeah.
rings. And it's almost like if that phone hadn't rung at that particular moment, what would have happened later?
Yeah.
Like, because I really feel like what happens after this, like, has a big influence on. I feel like there's a subtext that maybe later she comes to regret getting to the point of saying this, feeling like she was manipulated, or maybe
Right.
just feeling like she herself got carried away and pushed into a place that was embarrassing or out of line, or whatever. Or maybe, yeah, maybe she felt ashamed by it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like, it's
I don't
interesting
know.
because it doesn't come up. They
Right.
they relitigate a lot of the stuff that happens in this act, but they don't talk about this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gives it, and because it's really the end of Act One here, it gives it this extra layer of interest. And so anyway, I find myself endlessly fascinated by this moment,
Yeah.
because it always feels like, where like that moment in a tragedy where like a character makes a pivotal decision that sends him down a path that like leads to the stuff that happens later. It's like,
Yeah.
he could, even if the phone didn't ring, if he just didn't answer, or if he did answer and said, I'm sorry for the interruption, please go on, you know like, like,
Right, which he doesn't even do
he
that, which
doesn't.
I mean, I think it's questionable whether there would have been any way to salvage that again, because there's already this tension of like, why do you want to know this?
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
says, I don't
it's
want to
weird.
know. I want to know whatever you, and it's like, but it also makes me a little curious to watch/rewatch some of those movies, the Dangerous Minds, Stand and Deliver
Hmm.
type, with sort of a more critical awareness than those movies are intended to
Yeah.
provoke. Because in order for Carol, for that sort of story to unfold here, Carol would have to maintain her subservience, as the audience to his pedantic, paternalistic.
Brilliance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because that's who those figures are in those stories. They're
yeah,
these great inspirational, figures who have this like great ability to get through to these troubled kids that, like,
yeah,
on their own, they're adrift, and
yeah.
they don't know what to do, but they meet this one teacher who inspires them to
Mhm.
greatness. And
And who breaks the rules to
yeah,
get through to them.
definitely breaks the
Yeah.
rules, right? Like standing on the desk, it's like, that's like
Mhm.
that's like a watered down version of what's happening here. But I agree. There's like and I think people have talked about that with like Mr. Holland's Opus, like when you have the fucked up like gender dynamic, like it can get creepy at a certain point.
Yeah,
Um,
there's some Mr. Holland Opus scenes that are creepy.
yeah, where so you like you don't have that in Dead Poet Society, but like yeah, it's like there is an element to that idea of a story that like as humans, you like connections between people is like a central thing of drama, and so you get naturally pulled into it. But if you take a step back from that impulse of like enjoying seeing people connecting and so on, like there is something kind of fucked up about those stories,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And it's like, yeah, but they're not played that way. They don't really acknowledge it.
They're
So
right.
so I will say about this, like it definitely acknowledges
Yeah.
that element,
Yeah,
it doesn't.
you can watch those with a critical lens, but they're not. Yeah, that critique is not like
Yeah,
the director, the writer doesn't hold that critique.
they're just leaning into it as like a way to get,
Yeah, it's
sentiment.
like a hero worship
Yeah,
sentimentality thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And those are popular stories, and they have their
Hmm.
place, but
Yeah.
anyway, all right. So that's Act One. Now, Act One is the longest one,
Yeah.
so I suspect that Acts Two and Three won't take quite as long to get through. But I feel like it's important and interesting to go over the stuff in Act One because it is the catalyst for everything that comes later, but also because there are certain moments in there that aren't fully resolved, and so I just think yeah, I'm glad we got the chance to pick it apart. I
Yeah.
love that.
There are those who would say it's a form of aggression. What is a surprise? Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great line. I'm not 100% sure what like
What the
what
significance
the
of the line
implication
is. Yeah.
is.
Uh-huh.
Is it
Well, I do
hinting at
wonder if it
what
really,
comes later?
yeah, the fact that he is caught off guard by the
Hmm.
information, which is not intentional.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
I guess there's sort of two. There's probably the initial caught off guard by the complaint to the tenure committee, and then
Yeah.
there's the other thing where he doesn't go home and he doesn't hear about this like
Yeah.
legal situation
Yeah,
that's
I mean, he's
unfolding.
clearly well, yeah, let's revisit that when we talk about Act 2.
You see, I love to podcast and flatter myself I'm skilled at it. And
Oh.
I love the aspect of performance. I think I must confess that. Sorry. I
Yeah,
just
you know what I wrote next to that? Uh, I have an immediate visceral response to this. Oh boy. Off to a great start with Act 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wherein he responds to his surprise at the complaint. And
Oh man, he responds at great length.
yeah, yeah,
This opening monologue
yeah.
is so
It's a lot.
long.
It's a lot.
Oh my god. It takes so long to get to the point. It's
Yeah.
like he's gonna this is actually yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the dialogue. I just have to read this because I love it so much. It makes me so happy. Of course, I love it because of how awful it is, but
Uh-huh.
nonetheless. Um, uh, when I found I love to teach, I swore that I would not become that cold, rigid automaton of an instructor which I had encountered as a child. Now, I was not unconscious that it was given me to err upon the other side, and so I asked and ask myself if I engaged in heterodoxy. I will not say gratuitously, for I do not care to posit orthodoxy as a given good, but to the detriment of my students. I'm sorry. That's poetry. I love it. It's awful. I would hate to be around this person, but those words are so much fun to read. I can't even tell
Oh
you.
God. Yeah. Yeah. So he's just like processing out loud his hypocrisy.
I guess what I was trying to say by my opening and reframing it as a podcasting thing, and also by reading that, is like I get being drunk on this.
Yeah.
I really do. There is something so much fun about like spouting off in a way, and like and
Mhm.
he does this thing. This is something I do too, where in the middle of a point I interrupt it to do a caveat.
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I do that too. There are things where it's just like, oh,
And it's like it's so annoying, but I'm like, oh my god.
yeah,
And just the number of like heterodoxy, gratuitously, orthodox, like it's like these
yeah,
words being like fired out, these like
yeah,
fancy old school Greek words or whatever, like being thrown in. And it's just like, what are you doing right now? Like, do you think like what how do you think this is helping?
yeah.
Why do you think the complaint happened in the first place? Like, seriously, I
Oh,
know it wasn't just
because he
this.
angered her. It says it right here. Oh, I have
Oh,
angered you.
I see I've injured you.
I understand your hey, I understand your anger at teachers. I was angry with mine.
Don't get
I
bitter.
felt hurt and humiliated by them, which
Hmm.
is one of the reasons that I went into education. What do you want of me? Yeah, good question. I
Yeah,
was hurt.
there is definitely a fair critique that is made of this play that like they really shouldn't be meeting anymore, even after that first one, but definitely after the second one.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. I think that is a
It's his arrogance.
contrivance.
It's his arrogance. He's
Yeah,
so convinced, as with the house,
yeah,
this repeated, motif of like, no, no, I'm going to fix this. I'm
yeah,
going to fix this. Don't worry. I'm going to fix this.
yeah,
Like refusal to believe that he can't fix this through
yeah,
just, yeah.
yeah. Like he should be able to talk his way
Yeah.
out of it because he's so good at talking.
He's so good at talking.
and
Oh my God.
and he fully understands everything and he just needs to like reach her again. He's like back in the mode of act one,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. His tools aren't going to work.
But yeah, he does actually admit, like he cuts himself off in the middle of this sentence. Is it not always at those points which we reckon ourselves unassailable that we are most vulnerable? And then he says, yes, all right. You find me pedantic. Yes, I am. By nature, by birth, by profession. I don't know. I'm always looking for a paradigm for, I don't know what a paradigm is. It's a model. Then why can't you use that word?
Yeah.
So this is where we start to get like Carol's going to be more assertive here.
I feel that one point upon which I am unassailable is my unflinching concern for my students' dignity.
Hmm.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yes.
It certainly didn't come across that way to me, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so okay, right. So yeah, actually this is a point I wanted to talk about because it's a central thing in Act 2. So he says I asked you here in the spirit of investigation to ask what have I done to you and I suppose how I can make amends. Can we not settle this now? It's pointless really and I want to know. And Carol
It's
says what you can do to force me to retract. And he says that's not what I meant at all, to bribe me, to convince me, um, uh, to retract. That is not what I meant. I think you know it is not. So, you know, like I agree that with him that like consciously he doesn't think that's what he's doing. But like, what is the implication
yeah.
of
It's
can we not settle this now?
I think it's yeah, it's one of two things or maybe one of three things. Either he is essentially trying to figure out how to get her to retract, but he knows how bad that sounds. Or he thinks that the allegations are not going to make any impact. He's so arrogant that he just thinks that like, oh, it's pointless. Like these allegations you've made, they're pointless. They're not going to affect my tenure
He
process.
does say that
He
literally.
says it, but it's just a question of sort of like whether he believes that or he is actually concerned that they might, and he wants her to retract.
Yeah.
But I mean, whether he like wants her to whichever one of those situations, he clearly wants her to forgive him or to not even forgive him because he doesn't think he's done anything wrong, but to like take it back,
Yeah.
even if
To
she
let go
doesn't.
of her anger, which is unjustified.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's
This
what he
this
believes.
stoic thing, like if I have been in oh God. The Stoic philosophers say if you remove the phrase I have been injured, you have removed the injury. Now think. I know that you're upset. Just tell me literally, what have I done? What have I done you? This like, oh, if you just tell yourself that no injury has happened, then no injury has happened.
yeah, uh it's very self-serving, and you know, he's come up with a historical precedent to justify why it makes sense, which is very him. I feel the way Carol responds to this is something John should appreciate. This is closer to the way he talks.
Yep.
Whatever you have done to me, to the extent that you've done it to me, do you know, rather than to me as a student, and so to the student body, is contained in my report. I mean, that's a sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, woo,
Yeah.
that's a grammatically complex sentence.
Yeah.
Um, and it feels like the way, I don't know, it's like she's like moving into his mode of speech there, you know, and it's also about her being more assertive and like, no, like this isn't about what wrong you've done to me.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is part of the point of the play is like is like it isn't just about this. It isn't just about this one thing that happened.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, and you might see it as unfair, but in a way you're being punished for a wider pattern. And also like there's a lot of unfairness in the world, and that's how we got here. And now you're having to be on the other side of that. And like, you know, there's like poetic justice in that,
Yeah.
if not, you know, justice.
Yeah.
You know, what is justice anyway? I don't know. But you know, like I think there's an interesting thing there. So yeah, then we get like the specific complaints. He picks up the report. I
Mhm.
find that I'm sexist, that I'm elitist. I'm not sure I know what that means, other than it's a derogatory word meaning bad.
Which is so like, oh my God.
It's like, you know what that means. Give me a fucking break.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, here we go. A word he doesn't know.
Yeah,
Look it
yeah.
up in a dictionary.
Yeah, it's like, it's not a hard one, John, but
Yeah.
anyway. That I insist on wasting time in non prescribed, self aggrandizing, and theatrical diversions from the prescribed text. I am sure that's true. We've seen it. That these have taken both sexist and pornographic forms. Here we find listed instances. Closeted with a student told a rambling sexually explicit story in which the frequency and attitudes of fornication of the poor and rich are, it would seem, the central point. Moved to embrace said student, and all part of a pattern that I use the phrase the white man's burden, that I told you how I'd asked you to my room because I, quote, like you. He said he liked me, that he liked being with me. He let me write my examination paper over if I could come back oftener to see him in his office. It's ludicrous, blah, blah, blah. It's gonna, blah, blah, blah.
It's gonna humiliate you.
Yeah, it's gonna humiliate
And it's gonna
you.
cost me my
Yeah,
house.
yeah, yeah. He told me he had problems with his wife, that he wanted to take off the artificial stricture of teacher and student. He put his arm around me. And then she says, do you deny it? Can you deny it? Do you see? Don't you see? You don't see, do you? So, the thing that's to me notable about all of this, I would say the only exception that I would make, and I'm not sure if it's a rewrite issue or if it's we're supposed to draw, is this thing about he let me write my examination paper over. That was not discussed explicitly. So I don't know if we're supposed to believe that her grade was her examination paper, and the implication of the you're going to get an A is like she's assuming that that meant she could do her paper
Yeah,
over.
that is a little yeah.
Like that part is like slightly so, but the point I wanted to make is that with that exception, I mean, everything she describes here did happen. We saw all of this. It absolutely occurred. The issue is like how you want to interpret that stuff, but it definitely happened.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
to me like that's a point, and I'm gonna make it again in Act Three. That's like worth noting about this. A lot of the male fear of this stuff is based on a student fabricating things. And that is not
I
what
think
happens in this play.
I think there's the fear that is fabrication, and then there's the fear of decontextualization.
Sure.
You know, men will be
This is more
like,
of that.
I didn't mean it like that. You
Yeah.
know I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that
yeah.
seems to be what John is saying here. Like, you know, I don't you know, I
Yeah.
mean he doesn't say that, but this you know, he told me, this is him reading from the report. He told me that if I would stay alone with him in his office, he would change my grade to an A. What have I done to you? Oh my God, are you so hurt? Like, oh, this isn't about what you did. This is about some pre-existing failing in Carol that, like, why are you so hurt that you would twist my words and intent in this way? Ugh,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this, like, I would like to help you now before this escalates. This male move, when threatened to, like, put about to oh, it's going to be you who is, and of course there's precedent for this, that when a woman makes an accusation, that she ends up losing more than he does. I mean, we
Yeah.
talked earlier about Anita Hill,
Yeah.
about Monica Lewinsky, though that was a little bit different, but that it's the woman who loses
Yeah.
in those situations.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And her response, I don't think I need your help. I don't think I need anything you have. And then he says, I feel, so again, I told you earlier about this, like,
Yeah.
looking for when the verb is feel and when is it think. I feel, I don't care what you feel. Do you see? You can't do that anymore. And this, did you misuse it? Someone did. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, I should have said that already. I do think that I kind of did when I said that I do feel like his one of the underlying ideas of this story is that human beings in general are inclined to abuse power,
Yeah.
whatever form that takes. And so, anyway, that's something that she's specifically saying here. You do not have the power. Did you misuse it? Someone did. Are you part of that group? Yes. Yes, you are. You've done these things. And to
Mhm.
say, oh, let me help you with your problem. You're
Yeah, and so then again, and you're hurt, you're angry. I think your anger is betraying you down a path which helps no one.
yeah, yeah.
And then whiny John. I have some rights in my house. I have a right to tenure. I am part
The
of the
tenure
real
committee, good
world.
men and
Good men and
true.
true.
It
Good men
throws
and
that
true.
in.
Right. So, like, yeah, the big bad tenure committee has become good men and true. And of course, there is a new problem here, which is that, as he knows, there's a woman
Yeah,
on the tenure committee.
yeah.
Um,
Which is part of an escalation that definitely continues.
yeah. And whereas in Act One, he was talking in this very erudite way um about the signification of being an educator in an educational system with these various structures and dimensions. Here, oh, I'm not a boogeyman. I don't stand for something. How
Yeah.
conveniently he is able to change his opinion about these things when it suits him. And so I think, yeah, Carol is beginning to talk like one of them, like a member of academia, and it infuriates him. So the
Yeah.
top of the next page, Professor, I came here as a favor at your personal request. So again, terrible idea for him to have asked her here, as is
Definitely.
obviously the case. Perhaps I should not have done so, but I did on my behalf and on behalf of my group. And you
First
speak
mention of the group, by
first
the
mention of
way.
the group.
Go ahead.
And you speak of the tenure committee, one of whose members is a woman, as you know. And though you might call it good fun or an historical phrase or an oversight or all of the above to refer to the committee as good men and true, it is a demeaning remark. It is a sexist remark. And to overlook it is to countenance continuation of that method of thought. It's a remark. Oh, come on.
I love that she was actually going to go on about the remark. Like the implication is that she wasn't done. She was about to make more of a speech about like, let
Exactly.
me extol the deficiencies of this remark.
Exactly. She is, and I really think that's part of what is infuriating him, is that she is using his weapons against
And he
him.
doesn't like being
And he
talked to like
doesn't
that.
like being talked to the way he likes to talk to others.
Yep. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
Um,
And the story is vile and classist and manipulative. We can argue about whether it's pornographic.
Yeah.
I would say that it is not, because its intent is
Yeah.
not to
Titillate.
titillate.
Yeah, I agree. I think
But
that's probably an exaggeration, but it is like transgressive. It's definitely
it,
like crossing a line.
yeah, for sure. And that, I think, is where we are at
And
with
there's a sexual
these.
element to it,
Yeah.
no doubt. So like, yeah, like I feel like that's if you say what the story is, which I assume is there, then it's clear.
Yeah, and that's where the play just doesn't read the same way if it's written to if it's written in such a way that the accusations are, sorry, the proven accusations are only things that the reader can 100% agree with.
Yeah,
Like, it just doesn't, the drama's not there.
yeah, yeah,
Um
totally,
like
totally.
the pornographic, and then this climactic thing in act 3 of the accusation of attempted rape. Like, this is where it's like, wait a minute. Anyhow,
Yeah,
did
yeah.
I interrupt you?
No, but I wanted to read this thing from the bottom because to me this was like a really this is like really pointed. So she says, Carol says, uh, and you confess to a taste to play the patriarch in your class, to grant this, to deny that, to embrace your students. John says, how can you assert? How can you stand there? And Carol says, how can you deny it? You did it to me. Here, you did. You confess. You love the power to deviate, to invent, to transgress whatever norms have been established for us. And you think it's charming to question in yourself this taste to mock and destroy. But you should question it, Professor, and you pick those things which you feel advance you: publication, tenure, and the steps to get them you call, quote, harmless rituals, and you perform those steps. Although you say it is hypocrisy, but to the aspirations of your students, of hardworking students who come here, who slave to come here, you have no idea what it costs me to come to this school. You mock us. You call education hazing. And from your so protected, so elitist seat, you hold our confusion as a joke and our hopes and efforts with it. Then you sit there and say, what have I done? And ask me to understand that you have aspirations too. But I tell you that you are vile and that you are exploitative. And if you possess 1 ounce of that inner honesty you describe in your book, you can look in yourself and see those things I see, and you can find revulsion equal to my own. Good day.
That is like, woo! Oh man.
That's like that's a scorching there.
It's good. That's a
I
good one.
I absolutely love that speech. That is also extremely satisfying to say out loud.
It is real.
Because
Good
it's like
job.
if you could actually come up with that to say to someone, it's like God,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so
It's so good.
so to the point, and specifically addresses the stuff we were talking about earlier, like his like philosophy of education versus the things that he's going through.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think it also touches on this attitude of hypocrisy about progressivism in higher education. And this was actually the part that made me write down this note about, like, in a sense, there's a story of elitism being taken down by subsequent generations of elitism, like taking a more critical or progressive stance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think, just doing the math here, like I thought this was interesting actually in the cast list at the beginning, the characters, it says Carol, a woman of 20, John, a man in his 40s. So like, if this is like 1992 and he's like four, that would mean he's born in like 62 or earlier. And so that's like total boomer era. So he's coming out of that generation. And actually she talks about this
yeah.
later also specifically of questioning authority and like tearing down these like and like I'm sure he sees himself as that kind of figure
Yeah.
and doesn't really recognize the extent to which he's still upholding those things that
Right.
that generation said they wanted to tear down.
Right. Right.
At
Right.
least. And perhaps some of them believed it. But did it happen? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um yeah,
That's interesting.
um so then we have he has this long speech, um and like he tries to like pull her back in with, because she says good day at the end. Which like
It
it's like that
sounds.
Willy Wonka, like I said good day,
It's a
sir.
good taste. Yeah, it's a great way to storm out of a room.
It's like a
Unfortunately,
hospital
he
good
doesn't.
day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She prepares to leave the room,
Yeah.
and then he catches her off guard with nice day today, and then like makes this point about conventional communication, and we should agree that we're human and so on. So then he says,
I love this line where he says, "I'm not the subject."
oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and
Where
his
is
whole
that
thing
part?
of it's in the middle of that
That
speech. So
speech?
his whole thing is like,
I'm not the
we have to, in
subject.
order to have a meaningful exchange of ideas, we have to first acknowledge that we're both people. And he's immediately talking about we, which is a pivot away from taking responsibility. She's made these very specific accusations about his behavior, but then he makes it about this we of shared humanity in disagreement with one another. And and then I can't teach you about education, but I can tell you what I think. I'm not the subject. So sort of denying the idea that their system and their roles within it are in and of themselves valid spaces for critique. Um anyway,
Yeah.
I just found that interesting. And then, he's using this whole thing to kind of get that upper hand again. And
Yeah. Then we have a string of classic stuff that's more like Act One,
yeah.
where she says, "Wait, yes, I want to hear it." The yes, tell me frankly, my position. I want to hear it in your own words, what you want and what you feel.
Hmm.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah,
so
the interruptions clearly destabilize her.
my group, your group, the people I've been talking to, and then yeah, there's no shame in that. Everybody needs
Oh
advisors.
my
Everyone needs to expose
god.
themselves to various points of view. It's not wrong. It's essential. Good, good. Now, you and I, and then the phone rings again. Um, and then I noticed here he does say baby in this phone call. So this is the first time that comes up. I'm not sure if that actually happened in the movie version. I think maybe it didn't. I think at least in my memory, the first time he really says that is at the end when the big confrontation happens. But
Yeah, but
um,
it's like the seed is planted for her to put that into her mental model of
yeah,
who he
what kind of
is,
person
and
he
so
is.
that, yeah,
Yeah,
so that when it happens again in it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back.
yeah,
And she's already ready with that.
yeah. Uh, but also, it does seem like from this phone call that like um, I think so. Yeah,
So there is actually a problem with the house. It's just that in the
yeah.
beginning, the
The first
first
thing
call is
was
not
it.
like
Yeah,
that.
it's like
Yeah.
it's turned real now. And then oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up was this thing he says, sort of connected to that, like, um, what did he say? I don't stand for something. And then here he says, I'm not a exploiter, and you're not a deranged what revolutionary. So like it's like can't we not talk about general concepts and make this just a personal thing, you know?
Right.
And I definitely feel like part of the uh point, or at least part of the engine of the drama, is like this isn't just about the personal interaction between them.
Right.
It is taking place in a wider context, and that interaction alone wouldn't necessarily, like, out of the context, wouldn't necessarily lead to the stuff it leads to.
Yeah.
It's specifically the world outside before that whole thing happened that made the stuff that happened like worse. Not that it would have been okay otherwise, because I wouldn't say that, but I do think like it meant more than it would have otherwise,
Yeah.
without that stuff. And I mean, that's the world we live in. Um, but yeah, I just think it's interesting that it's like he's into these abstract concepts, but when it comes to his person, it's like, can we not talk about that stuff and like just make it about, like, can I just say I'm sorry and like we just like drop this thing?
Right. And this is where we find out. So, I mean, on this phone call, it becomes clear that he's saying that, like, it seems to me like the concern is, the wife is like, we should rescind our offer on the house
Yeah,
because now we don't know if you're going to get tenure. And he says, like, no, I'm dealing with the complaint right now.
yeah,
And, and then we find out they're actually about to head into this process, this, tenure committee hearing, and he's trying to, this is kind of like his Hail Mary to stop that from happening.
yeah,
And then he again turns it into, I'm trying to save you from this.
yeah. Then tell her that I think it's gonna be fine. Again, I'm like, this guy's got no self-awareness. You if you have an inkling of a thought that like you're gonna get out of it, shut the fuck up. Why would you say
The
that on the phone in front
arrogance.
of her? You know she's listening to you. like
Yeah.
like especially now, you should know that she's paying attention to what you're saying, and you shouldn't imply that you've already worked a deal that you haven't.
Yeah.
What? I just couldn't believe the arrogance to believe that it was okay to like, like say like, yeah, oh
Right.
no, don't worry, I got this.
Yeah.
I'm so like,
I'm so
she's
persuasive.
on the verge of dropping it right now. I know it.
I can just feel it.
It's like, okay. So where we transition from there is just fucking great. So um we have he tries to he goes back to like she says, you said we should agree to talk about my complaint. He says, that's correct. Carol says, but we are talking about it. He says, well, that's correct too. You see,
Oh god.
this is the gist of education.
Oh my god.
Carol says, no, no. I mean, we're talking about it at the tenure committee hearing.
Yeah, I mean
It's
it's
like, yeah, you understand, like, where you thought you were out of this. Why did you think that?
yeah.
Like, what? I'm gonna drop it now because of what you said so far? Are you serious?
Right.
Like, how deluded are you? Um, and then she transitions to so yeah, I'm sorry if I was discourteous to and then she says, I really should go. And then he says, now look, granted, I have an interest in the status quo, all right? Everyone does. Do they? But what I'm saying is that the committee, and she says, Professor, you're right, just don't impinge on me. We'll take our differences and then we get this a bunch of interruptions here. I'm trying to save you. That's the thing you're referencing. You're trying to save me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm doing you the courtesy. I'm talking straight to you. We can settle this now. I want you to sit down and you must excuse me. She starts to leave the room. Sit down. It seems we just have a wait one moment. Wait one moment. Just do me the courtesy to. He restrains her from leaving. Carol, let me go, all caps. John, I have no desire to hold you. I just want to talk to you. Let me go. Let me go. Would somebody help me? Would somebody help me, please? This is the end of Act Two. So, like, it's like, oh boy. Oh boy. You were already in deep shit. Are you seriously going to physically restrict? Like, what are you doing? And I think the staging of it was interesting in the movie because in the movie it was like pinning her against the bookshelf,
Yeah.
which like has a little more of an aggressive context than like what the language. It just says he restrains her from leaving. It could have been as little as a hand on the shoulder, but like he chose to portray it as like a real like pinning where it's like you actually understand her panicked running out of the room, like what the fuck, like oh my god. And I also, something I appreciated this time that I didn't get before, is the natural symmetry of progression from the soothing hand on the shoulder in the first act to this physical restraint to full-on physical assault in act 3. There is a through line there, and there is a connection between those things, and like they don't mean the same thing, but they are on a continuum. And like I feel like that's part of the point here, is that like there is this latent threat, and it was real.
Yeah.
It is totally validated, you know, by the end, like that she's not, her freaking out here is not like out of proportion, I think.
Yeah, like that she had this intuition.
Yeah, that there
That
is
she was
this
reading it.
implied like threat of violence there,
Yeah.
that like maybe he doesn't even realize that he's capable or even like heading in the direction of doing something like that, but she's picking up on it maybe better than he is.
Yeah.
And like and realizes like, oh shit, like this isn't just about like meeting about this complaint and stuff. Like there's like physical danger here potentially.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
so
Act 3.
oh, okay. Okay, so let's talk about Act 3. Right away, just stylistically, I mean, I've read some of my favorite speeches. I just want to mention this first part of Act 3 because I think this is as good of an illustration of the thing they call Mamet speak as anything in this play, because like it's so long before we get a complete sentence. I've asked you here, this is John, I've asked you here against I was most surprised you asked me, against my better judgment, I was most surprised, against yes, I'm sure. If you would like me to leave, I'll leave. I'll go right now. Let us begin correctly, may we? I feel that is what I wish to do. That was why I came here. But now perhaps you'd like me to leave. I don't want you to leave. I asked you to come. I didn't have to come here. No, I just,
Yeah.
like the way they're dancing around here, like is like that's the rhythm of it, where it's this like rat-a-tat thing that um the characters aren't saying very much, but they're talking a whole lot.
They are talking a whole lot. And here we've got, again, he's still holding on to his arrogance. She says, I didn't have to come here. No, thank you. Although I feel it would profit you something to, oh my God, John.
He's still doing it. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah, and then we get a clue here that seems to fly by him, because she says, the court officers told me not to come. And he says the court officers, but he doesn't really follow up on it.
He does question it, but he kind of moves forward.
I think it's because she sort of gets up to leave.
Right, she gets up.
And then he's like, whoa, wait,
Yeah. And then he loses the thing about the court officers. Yeah. I was shocked that you asked. Yeah, so like there's definitely some heavy
foreshadowing
there.
Okay, so here we go. What is it you wish to tell me? All right. I cannot help but feel you are owed an apology. A terrible, not an apology. You are owed, I can't help but feel you are owed an apology. Right? So he thinks he's doing something, and he says, and I reread the accusations. Nope.
I love this part. I love this like thing. This is one of my favorite parts of the play. This whole like no. We're going to use words, and we're going to use them precisely. And if you're going to say accusations, I'm going to say what accusations? The tenure committee, excuse me, but those are not accusations. They have been proved. They are facts. You will henceforth refer to them as facts.
Yep.
I just love that. Like, like if you're going to say accusations, you have to acknowledge that they have been accepted at this point. So,
Uh-huh.
and then we get another version of that. Later where he says, I've spent time studying the indictment.
Uh-huh.
Carol says, you'll have to explain that word to me. John says, an indictment, yes, is a bill of particulars, all right, yes, in which is alleged, no, I can't allow that. I cannot allow that. Nothing is alleged. Everything is proved.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's also something satisfying about it because, and I know like there's just legal reasons for this, but just because like alleged is like the journalistic thing that you say,
Yeah.
when something hasn't actually been like ruled on officially. And
Y-
so like it's I think illegal to just say like someone's a murderer when they're on trial for it or whatever. Like, you just
Right.
say alleged because
Right,
like
right.
it's been alleged and you're at least reporting the fact about it. Um but yeah, I love this whole thing that we get on from that. Um if I may, from whatever you feel is, quote, established by, the issue here is not what I feel. It is not my feelings, but the feelings of women and men, your superiors, who've been polled, do you see, to whom evidence has been presented, who have ruled, do you see, who have weighed the testimony and the evidence and have ruled, do you see, that you are negligent, that you're guilty, that you are found wanting and in error and are not, for the reasons so told, to be given tenure, that you are to be disciplined for facts, not alleged. What is the word? But proved. Do you see? By your own actions. That is what the tenure committee has said. That is what my lawyer said. For what you did in class, for what you did in this office. So anyway, I again, we get full barrel speeches here. Uh, uh, the next one is about uh, you're going to say you have a career and that you've worked for 20 years for this. Do you know what you've worked for? Power, for power. Do you understand? And you sit there and you tell me stories about your house, about all the private schools, and about privilege, and how you are entitled to buy, to spend, to mock, to summon, all your stories, all your silly, weak guilt. It's all about privilege, and you won't know it. Don't you see? You worked 20 years for the right to insult me, and you feel entitled to be paid for it.
Yeah.
Your home, your wife, your sweet deposit on your house. Don't you
Yeah.
have feelings? That's my point, you see. Don't you have feelings? Your final argument. What is it that has no feelings? Animals. I don't take your side. You question if I'm human. So actually, a small pause on that point. uh Animals do have feelings.
Yes.
And I noticed that she took that line out in the movie version. She didn't say animals. She just said, your final argument, I don't take your side, you question if I'm human. Like she
Yeah.
just went straight to that.
Yeah, I
Because I
understand
feel like the thing to
improvement.
say,
Yeah.
like, what do you think, I am a machine or something,
Machine, yeah.
like it doesn't, animals doesn't quite work there because they absolutely have feelings.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's interesting the power to summon. Reading the fact that he's now called her to his office twice. Um,
Yeah.
that is a way of using power and privilege. And of course, it doesn't work out well to him. But yeah, then she talks about her responsibility and and this, even if you were inclined to forgive me. Um yeah, ugh,
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of getting into the next bit here, where we kind of pivot. um but I want to mention this part because this is very interesting to me. And again, I'm not sure if this is rewrites or if there's some weirdness going on here. But she starts off by saying, You want unlimited power to do and say what you want, and it pleases you as it pleases you. Testing, questioning, flirting. John, I never. Carol, excuse me one moment, will you? She reads from her notes. The 12th. Have a good day, dear. The 15th. Now don't you look fetching. April 17th. If you girls would come over here. I saw you. I saw you, Professor, for 2 semesters. Sit there, stand there, and exploit your, as you thought, paternal prerogative. And what is that but rape? I swear to God. You asked me in here to explain something to me as a child that I did not understand, but I came to explain something to you. You are not God. You asked me why I came. I came here to instruct you. She produces his book and your book. You think you're going to show me some light, you maverick, outside of tradition? No, no. She reads from the book's liner notes of that fine tradition of inquiry, of polite skepticism. And you say you believe in free intellectual discourse. You believe in nothing. You believe in nothing at all. Anyway. Sorry, I just think that was a great sick burn, but also the 2 semesters line was interesting to me. Again,
Yeah.
it made me wonder if there's some like
Yeah.
it could just be true that it's a 2 semester course and she got through the first semester and then the second semester started to have problems. Like that works. Or like I said, like something happened and this is just a mistake. Because I noticed that in the movie version she said all semester. She did not say two
Yeah.
semesters.
Yeah.
So it made me think that it was like a mistake and it like should have been changed. I
Yeah.
don't know.
So here I think we're getting into perhaps Mamet's beliefs. You believe in what you call freedom of thought. You believe in freedom of thought and a home and prerogatives for your kid and tenure. And I'm going to tell you, you believe not in freedom of thought, but in an elitist, protected hierarchy which rewards you and for whom you are the clown. And you mock and exploit the system that pays your rents. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is uh uh there is this is where we're getting the full reversal basically,
Yeah.
where she's going on and he's like barely saying anything. He's
Yeah.
getting like a word or two in between these very extensive and very eloquent speeches,
Yeah.
I have to say. um and Yeah, I think that whole thing about uh, freedom of speech is interesting, or freedom of thought, like because it's like continued to be such a flashpoint for a lot of these sorts of things, like
Yeah.
whatever tension there is between freedom of speech and like being censored for certain things
Yeah. Yeah.
or being you know required not to say certain things or whatever, like that's
Yeah, he's soon gonna, dismiss all of this as political correctness.
yeah.
And that I think was that was the term at the time. And nowadays, I'm sure he would be railing against woke culture.
Yes. Oh yes, 100%. Yeah, this is the part I wanted to mention. Oh, sorry. I want to say one more thing about that previous part. So, like that stuff from the classroom. So, like, have a good day, dear. Yeah, don't say that.
If you're a grandma.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a grandma, you could probably get away with it, but if you're a man, just don't say that.
Yeah.
That's not gonna fly. But it's not the worst. To me, the worst of these 3 examples is now don't you look fetching. Don't you gotta be
Yeah.
fucking kidding me. Really?
Yeah.
You said that and you thought that was okay? Like what? And
Yeah.
and it's notable to me here, he doesn't deny any of that. He doesn't say I never said that. He doesn't say like, oh, you're making stuff up in your notes.
Right.
It's like I think what we're invited to believe is that he really did say that stuff, and like I said earlier, that she's written it down because she wrote down everything that he said,
Yeah.
because she's very thorough in her notes, note taking, I guess. So I just wanted to say that, because I think also it suggests uh, a wider pattern of behavior, that like this interaction didn't tell us everything.
Yeah.
You know, and that like the ambiguity that we have here can uh in a way be alleviated by some of this, or at least partially. Like it shows like there is, like, that is sexual harassment for real, I think, to say to a student, don't you look fetching.
Yeah.
Like that is like something you're directly told not to say.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
To any student. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention was this thing about free discussion. Yeah, so it is the power that you hate so deeply that any atmosphere of free discussion is impossible. It's not unlikely, it's impossible, isn't it? So I think that's also something that he wants to say here, that like these hierarchies, these artificial things that people put on are directly at odds with free discussion. And I think that's something that he probably doesn't like about universities, you know. And I'm sure he would see it as like, you know, these radical leftists imposing their shit or whatever, but I think it can cut many ways. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to just mean that.
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily framed that way here. It's actually Carol saying this.
Yeah, I mean, power imbalance makes free discussion, like truly free discussion, impossible, because there's
Yeah.
always these power hierarchies.
Yeah.
So the risk that, yeah, that various people put themselves at by saying the same thing, it's different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and then this speech here about some of us overcame prejudices, economic, sexual. You cannot begin to imagine and endure humiliations. I pray that you and those you love will never will encounter. To gain admittance here, to pursue that same dream of security you pursue. We who are at any moment in danger of being deprived of it by the administration, by the teachers, by you, by say one low grade that keeps us out of graduate school, by one capricious or inventive answer on our parts, which perhaps you don't find amusing. So anyway, I feel like that's really putting a fine point on the parallel, you know,
Yeah.
and also the overall idea that he is being subject to a thing that he has been the perpetrator of.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like it.
Yeah.
But he has
Indeed.
never had to sit on that side of things. And so he didn't fully appreciate how bad it is to have
Yeah.
to sit on that
Yeah.
side of things.
Yeah.
And so again, yeah, I think that's a huge point here.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like uh uh yeah, then they have this argument about laying the hand
Yeah.
on her shoulder and what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets to decide what that means?
Her line, it's not for you to say, which
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
loved
yeah.
this. You yapping little fool. You little yapping fool. You
meant
think
to
I
read
want
that.
revenge. I don't want revenge. I want understanding.
Understanding. I again, a parallel with Act One. Her whole thing in Act One is I don't understand. I don't understand. She wanted understanding. And
Yeah.
now she wants him to understand. It's like the whole
Yeah.
thing has been flipped around and he needs to learn something here. And he does, to his credit, admit, although perhaps he's just saying this, he does say, where was that part? He says, I take your point and I see there is much good in what you refer to. It's vague.
It seems very hollow to me.
It does seem hollow. It does seem hollow, and especially because of where this goes, it seems extra hollow. But yeah, I don't know. So then we definitely get, I think this is Mamet entering the picture with corruption. So we see that I feel a lot of what she said up to this point, I think Mamet agrees with, and I think he thinks these are valid critiques of the professor, for sure. But I think he doesn't think, I think he still thinks her group is corrupt as well, and that they are abusing their power. And that's what we get here, where he says, where she says, what if it were possible that my group withdraws its complaint? So she's like, okay, you know what? We're not above cutting a deal. we can cut a deal with you. We can
Mhm.
let this go if we can get you to do something for us. You know, it's just like it becomes a little bit of an extortion. And it's funny that she's
Sheesh. No, don't think of it that
I love that
way.
part too. I love that's just like
Mhm.
we're gonna be real precise about our words here, and I'm not gonna let you get
Mhm.
away with a word I don't think is appropriate.
Yeah.
I'm the teacher here, all right?
Mhm.
Um uh uh yeah, but I think it's interesting that it's hard to take because, you know, ultimately I think, you know, the in the wider society, you know, this group, these points they're making, I feel there's a lot of right to what they're saying. And so it is painful to have them be corrupt as well. To have them be willing to, we'll overlook this if you'll do this stuff for us. But I
Mhm.
think dramatically it's very interesting.
Dramatically, it's interesting, and it's not like what they're asking for isn't benefiting them directly.
Yes,
It's not
true,
like money or an improved grade.
true,
It's
true. And she does insist on that point, not
yeah,
in exchange for what do we derive from it.
right, right. That it's yeah, that it's about, changing your curriculum.
Do you see that? Yes. That is a little word, Professor. Yes, I see that. But you will.
Oof.
I know. I know. It's chilling. Um
You have an agenda, we have an agenda.
yeah. So this is where I think we get the idea of what I was trying to say earlier that human beings will abuse their power and like and that can cut both ways. Even if you're the one, actually, this is an example I wanted to bring up of this because I feel like this is a less fraught.
But I think I want to push you to differentiate between using power and abusing power. I mean, who loses in this situation? What makes it abuse for her to say, if you want us to withdraw the complaint, or if you want us to speak to the tenure committee, then you need to change your curriculum in order to to do this thing that I think is morally better.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. Use, certainly, but I don't know about abuse.
Fair enough. I guess I'm not planting a stake in the ground and saying this is abuse. I'm just saying like I think an audience could see it that way. I think it's possible that Mama sees it that way. And so anyway, that's why I bring it up. I think it's fair to say like it's not necessarily
Someone chooses the books.
abuse. Yeah, at this point, I guess. And uh uh um uh so oh sorry, yeah, the example I was going to bring up that seems to have some things in common but like I said is less fried is this thing from Battlestar Galactica. Now I know that's not real life, don't worry everybody, I'm aware Battlestar Galactica did not really happen no matter what the ending said. Anyway, um you know, at a certain point there's this big like mutiny. You know, it's like Gata and Tom Zarek and they overtake the ship because of what they see as like Adama and
Mhm.
Rosalind's like, you
Yeah.
know, unilateral decision
Yeah,
making
yeah.
that's like corrupt and you know, and like there's validity I think in their critiques. I think, you know, Adama and Rosalind are not as bad as John is here. So it's not exactly the same, but I think like
Yeah.
I get the critique, and then they do take over, and then Tom Zarek executes the council or whatever, the people who were elected, and it's like, well, if you're not gonna go along with me, then I'm just gonna fucking kill you. And it's like,
Right.
oh, so the people who had a complaint and made a valid point and overturned the regime, then turned around and like did the shit that they were complaining about.
Yeah, I mean, his real history is also full of examples of people abusing power to like starting in an ethically justifiable position, and then yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But no, you're right. If you can make a comparison to Battlestar Galactica, it's best to do that. Um,
Yeah. It was an example I was thinking about because like Claude and I had a big argument about that because he really took the revolutionary side, the
uh,
mutineer side. And I thought like, yeah, I trust Rosalind and Adama more than I do Zarek and Gate, like,
right,
you
right. I mean,
know?
it's sort of a question of like means justifying an end, or ends justifying a means, of like if you're, and how principled, like when do you have to set aside a principle in order to get a less bad result.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, this
yeah.
is this though, I don't even really know what to say about these final moments of the play, except, just like read them or watch it, because it's like
It's
this.
bim bam boom. I think of this idea of here's a list of books which we find questionable. So that I mean that's like painfully relevant. I
Yeah,
mean that is absolutely still a thing. That whole idea. It isn't fully specified like what exactly they're referring to, but eventually he looks at it and realizes that his book is on the list, and um and he says, you want to ban my book? And she says, we do not. We want it removed from inclusion as a representative example of the university. And I love that specification that it's like, no, I didn't say ban your book. I didn't say we're going to burn it. I didn't say we're going to write the publisher and force them to not publish it. I
yeah,
didn't say no one could ever buy it. I didn't even say you couldn't teach it in the class.
yeah,
All I said is that it should be removed as a representative example of the university. That is a very small request.
yeah.
And like the fact that he takes it as you want to ban my book is like kind of a distortion of what is actually
Yeah,
happening
that's one of
there.
the phrases people really love to distort, like the meaning of book banning.
Absolutely. And
And
that's why I
it's
love that he
become a
went
really
there.
bipartisan pursuit these days,
Yes.
banning books,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
doing limiting specific access to books.
And things being referred to as banning books or
Yeah,
restricting freedom of speech that like
yeah,
aren't really.
yeah,
You know, it's like, no, let's be precise here. Come on, you're Mr. Precise. Let's be direct about what this
yeah.
actually is. I never said I want to ban your book.
There is something interesting here. So we may recall from Act One that he makes this claim that provoking his students with ideas is his job.
Mm-hmm.
And now here he's got a different, she's got this, the group has this list of books um that they want taken out of the curriculum or whatever. And then there's this statement which he doesn't even read. She hands him a statement
Yeah.
and he says, no, no, it's out of the question. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking of. I want to tell you something. I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. That's my name on the door, and I teach the class. And that's what I do. I've got a book with my name on it, and my son will see the book one day. And I have a responsibility. No, I'm sorry. I have a responsibility to myself, to my son, to my profession. I haven't been home in 2 days. Do you know that? Thinking this out. So you notice how, like, what it means to be a teacher has completely changed. Now it's about the fact that he's the one on the door, that he's the one who gets to make these decisions,
Yeah.
and that means not being open to even looking at the statement.
Let us reimpose the artificial stricture.
Indeed, indeed,
For I
indeed.
like it now.
And so then this thing of him having been in a hotel is kind of instrumental more than anything to explain why he's missing a key piece of information, which the audience still doesn't have yet, though
Yeah.
we have had clues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so yeah, I want to talk about that you haven't been home thing because this is a question I have for you. I was listening to this podcast of these two Irish blokes talking about this play, and they had a debate about this thing that I think you're right that it's instrumental. Like that's part of it. I think I don't want to deny that. But there's these lines, they don't read like much on the page. Um I haven't been home for 2 days. You haven't? I've been No, if it's of interest to you, I've been in a hotel thinking. You haven't been home? thinking, do you see, right? And then there's later on, um later on after he gets the call and finds out what's going on, which I'll talk about in a second. She says, I thought you knew. And uh so one of them was like, I think she's actually feeling a bit of sympathy here, that like there's a little bit of a Count of Monte Cristo. Maybe I went too far. Maybe this is too much. That there's like a bit of hesitation here and a bit of regret, or if not regret, at least like a bit of sympathy coming through. And I do feel that in the movie version, she did kind of play it like that. Like, you haven't been home, like, she could have read that in a lot of ways, and because Mamet directed it and like approved that performance, I feel like maybe we are supposed to believe that. I just think it's interesting because she is very formal, direct, and I would say unsympathetic towards John, for the most part, after Act One. And so I just think it's interesting that like there's a hint of it entering here before we're going to get the worst thing in the whole play.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you agree? I don't know. That's what I wanted to ask.
Uh,
Like, what do you think about those lines?
yeah. I agree that in the movie it plays as sort of sympathetic. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's ambiguous for me in the text.
It's pretty ambiguous in the text. I agree. That's why I was using the movie version, as
Yeah.
because I think from the text alone it's hard to know, because the other guy was like, no, I think she's just saying like, oh, you haven't been home. I guess that means you don't know this other thing that's happened.
Yeah, I mean, when I read it, that is what I took from it.
Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't seem to show any sympathy when she's explaining this rape charge. You tried to, oh, don't you know?
Yeah.
I thought you knew. You tried to rape me. I was leaving this office. You pressed yourself into me. You pressed your body into me. My group has told your lawyer that we may pursue criminal charges. Under the statute, I am told it was battery.
Yeah.
Yes, and attempted rape. That's right.
Yeah.
Of course, I thought you knew.
Of course, I thought you knew. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that was another line that I thought she read sympathetically in the movie version, but it's not totally obvious
Yeah,
here.
I don't really take it as sympathetic, except perhaps in a really limited way of like, oh, this is embarrassing for you that you brought me here and we've had this whole exchange while you didn't know this thing was
Yeah.
looming.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it could just be that for sure. It could just be that. Um yeah, so okay, yeah, this is the thing I wanted to bring up about this bit here, because again, I think like if you get specific about what's happening, so what is the ultimate male fear in this context? False rape charges, right? That's like the ultimate thing. Do I really believe that he tried to rape her? No, not really. That's not what she says, though. If you read the line, what she says was, you tried to rape me according to the law.
yeah,
You pressed yourself into me. You pressed your body into me. Um, uh, um, my group has told your lawyer that we may pursue criminal charges under the statute. I am told it was battery and attempted rape. That's right. So she's not saying, I'm saying
right. She's not fabricating.
you tried to,
It's
yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's just a contextualization of the thing that
The
happened.
thing that happened that he can't
Yeah.
deny, and that, the pressed your body into me, like that
Mhm.
isn't specified in the playtext,
Yeah.
but in the movie version, he does do that. It's like pinning her against the
Yeah.
bookshelf, and I think that counts. Like, it is definitely a kind of assault, regardless
Yeah.
of whether you want to view it as attempted rape or not. And it's like, this is what the law says. I am just following what the law says.
Right.
So if you want to be mad at that, be mad at the law and what you did. Don't be mad at me for doing, because it there is a version of this story where she's like, you raped me,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
know that's a lie, right? It could
Yeah.
have been that, but it isn't that. And I just think like
Right.
when people talk about this, they talk about this as false rape charges. And again, just like the thing with you want to ban my book, it's like that's not really what's happening here. Nothing she's charging here didn't happen.
Right.
Right now, you can argue whether you think it should be so, but it's just from the law.
Yeah.
And like, if you're entitled to bring a charge under the law, you know, like you can say like you're bad for doing that, but I mean, morally, like, okay, but like this isn't, I don't know, to me this isn't the ultimate nightmare, and I just think it's notable that it's not that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It stood out to me. There's a lot of instances of that in here where it's
Yeah.
like if you read the finer points, like I think the way people talk about it gets generalized and gets vague and like loses the nuance of what's actually going on here, that I think, again, like I said, I don't think it's a fully, the political point of view of the play is not something I fully agree with by far, but like I think there's more to it than people give it credit for sometimes, and that's an example of that. Yeah, so then we come out of that with another phone call coming in. He's just telling her to get out. I guess his wife calls and we get, I can't talk to you now, baby. And she makes a decision that she probably would regret later, to say, "Don't call your wife baby." And that's the thing. And I love the way William Hilliam plays the reaction to that. Like, to me, that's something that you can't get from what.
Uh-huh.
Because he's like half smiling and like
It's
it's
like a
play
snarl.
it's yeah, it's like he at first he didn't even, he was like, I don't even understand, like, what was just said, like,
Yeah.
what, he's processing it, and it turns dark like very quickly,
Yeah.
you know and so
Yeah, it does. It's like it's really surprising. It's like, what? What?
yeah.
Like, of everything that is going on right now, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Like he didn't see that coming, and it's like, this is over the line. This far, no farther, you know? And yeah, that's the other thing I was gonna say is like, I also feel like, again, I don't know if Mamet intended this, but I feel it's there, so I feel justified in seeing it there. I think there's the thing here of, you know, the power dynamic between men and women over time a lot of times has been based on just pure brute force,
Yeah.
physical coercion. And I think there is something poetic about the fact that when the institutions that have propped him up and that have propped up men for time immemorial, when they don't do that anymore, he resorts to the old fashioned thing, the one thing he still has that he can use as power over her, which is just pure physical violence. I think it isn't fun to watch, but I feel it's essential to the play to have that because it makes such a strong point about at least some of the themes that this play wants to address. That he goes there and that he says, well, among other insulting terms like the C word, that thing you referenced earlier. You think you can come in here with your political correctness and destroy my life, right? It's interesting that it's like he even realizes it's the straw that broke the camel's back, because if you believe it's just about don't call your wife baby, then he shouldn't be saying that. He should be saying, don't tell me what to call my wife. You don't know my wife. You don't know, like she loves it when I call her, like, you don't get to tell me what I do at home,
Yeah.
like what at work, that's fine. But it's no, you don't, uh, you think you can come in here with your political correctness and destroy my life. Like that's what he's saying,
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
it's clear that the rage isn't about don't call your wife baby. It's just that was the straw that broke the camel's back, basically. It was
Right.
the smallest thing that like he doesn't even reference
Yeah,
again.
yeah. And I think, it's interesting that you mentioned before that, like, the ultimate fear of a man in this situation is a false rape accusation.
Yeah.
The ultimate fear of a woman in this situation is rape.
Oh, I know.
And,
I know.
and that is one of the reasons why I know, but it's one of the reasons why
I'm
this
saying it's
panel.
symmetric.
No,
But go ahead.
I know, but this idea that physical violence is lurking at the edges of any one-on-one interaction between a woman and a man.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, most of those don't end up coming to violence or even verbal, verbal aggression, but
Yeah.
you have drilled into you through experiences that, that it's always lurking. And if it isn't sexual violence, it's this other thing, this like, I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole, you little cunt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That you've got the two threats of violence. Um,
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets really awful.
mhm,
It's like the idea that I would rape you is a compliment. And
right.
and I wouldn't even
Yeah.
rape,
After
people say
how
that.
I treated you, you should be. And then, of course, the directions here just said,
Yeah,
he's punching her, he's beating
yeah,
her, he's holding a chair
yeah,
over as if he's gonna smash her with it.
yep.
Um, and she is cowering in the corner, lowering her head to herself. And he said, and yeah, and she says, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. So here, uh, he uh, he pauses with the chair. Like the chair is the point where he's like, "Oh shit,
Yeah, where he realizes, like, yeah.
I just fucked up big time, and actually, there's no way out of this.
Hmm.
Like I already lost my job. I'm going to jail now. I just did a
Yeah.
full-on physical assault on someone. Like there's no escaping this at all." And he sits to his desk in the play version, and he says, "Well." And in the movie version, he sits on a chair, the chair that he had raised before, and says, "Oh my God." Slightly different ending there, but the same conclusion, which is, yes, that's right. And I think it's also interesting in the play version, which was in the movie version, that she looks away from him, lowers her head, and says to herself, "Yes, that's right." I don't know. That's an
Yeah.
interesting slight variation there
Yeah.
to end on like an interior moment, especially because you don't get a lot of that from Carol in the play, and so it's interesting that we sort of close on that, and like those words are so brief and small, so it's definitely ambiguous exactly what that means, but I guess I take it to mean that at least this is how I want to interpret it, that you know whatever you think was unfair or misinterpreted or whatever in these proceedings that we've had and the charges that I made and so on, this proves that there was some underlying validity to it. And like, yes, that's right. You realize that too now, and like there is at least some, although she's been physically assaulted, so it's not a great moment, there is some catharsis in at least now you understand, you
Yeah,
know?
now you can see what you were capable of because you've done it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
already knew that you were
In
capable
a
of
way that
this.
there's no wiggling out of this. There's no saying like, well, but I didn't mean that you took it the wrong way. Like there's just
Right.
no room for that, because like I never, it's, I mean, you never want to physically assault a student.
Right.
Just like,
If the argument up to this point was, yeah, I put my arm around you, but there was nothing sexual about that. That was
yeah,
just, I was trying to be comforting. There's no good way to spin punching a
yeah.
student in the
Yeah.
face.
Yeah. The only context that I could think of where you would ever want to punch a student in the face is if that student is literally attacking you.
So self-defense.
Self-defense. That's
Yeah,
the
there's
only.
no self-defense
I was just
argument
thinking
here.
through like what scenario could you punch a
Yeah.
student? That's the only one. They literally
Hmm.
come in there attacking you in your office. Okay, you can defend yourself. That's it.
Hmm.
There's She never physically attacked him. Very, very much not. So there's absolutely no
Professor, I can only learn if you punch me in the face. Yeah,
too
not to make
bad.
light of
Too
this,
bad. You're
but
gonna have to go somewhere else.
I mean,
I'm not doing it.
it's obvious. Yeah, the back of the play has this New York Times segment. Oleanna is likely to provoke more arguments than any play this year. And it's been 20 years since we first saw it.
Yep.
And it's been 30
32 years
years.
since it was
Yeah.
originally staged.
And I'd say it's, although the context uh of then versus now, there are similarities and differences. It still feels quite potent.
Yeah. Yeah. There's really something there, and like it isn't, um, the point of view of David Mamet is not, I think, the correct point of view, and I don't think that the implications of everything in the story are correct, and so on. But I think it is thoughtful enough, and it has enough things to say that are interesting and have value, and I think. Um, I also think the dramatic moves of the characters and the dialogue are incredible. I mean, reading that stuff is such an immense pleasure. I can't even tell you. I love reading those lines. It's like what a wonderful thing to be able to say out loud. I don't know. It's very poetic, coming from reading a lot of Shakespeare. Like I feel like this is the closest thing in a modern context to like something like that, where there is a poetry to the rhythm of the words that I love, in addition to the interesting questions that it raises and so on. So I want to make sure I mention that stuff, because like a lot of the appeal to me is definitely the classical drama that is so strong here. And if you could somehow extract it from the world and just make it about these characters, I think it would work on that level alone. But I think it gets a boost from the fact that it is actually addressing real stuff that is significant, and that is worth talking about, and it gives you like a platform for talking about it, because it isn't particularly preachy about it, I think. In the end, it's certainly possible to take it as affirming your particular point of view, but I think it's actually pretty decent at giving some consideration to various points of view, and seeing validity in many of them, and that it doesn't necessarily love or celebrate any particular point of view. And yeah, in that way, it is sort of a tragedy. It's about how humans can like just do bad things to each other, and so it works on that level. But anyway, nonetheless, the wider point is, I mean, that's what I wanted to talk about. It stays with me. It's something I've been obsessed with since I originally saw it, and yeah, I'm glad we got the chance to like really
Yeah.
dive in. It took a lot. I knew that wasn't like the thing you most wanted to watch in the world, or read, but yeah.
But
So I
I'm glad that I
appreciate your doing
reapproached
it.
the text because there is a lot when you know what you're in for, you you can be open to finding more other things as well. It's a shocking play and it's meant to be shocking and it's meant to anger the audience and in that way it is very effective. And I appreciated reapproaching, I was not looking forward to this.
Yes, I
Um,
know.
but I appreciated once I was reading it, it actually didn't take me long into act 1 before I was like, "Oh, there's a lot more going on here than I noticed or remembered."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, as I said at the top, I think it, reading it in the context of this year, I'm noticing different things the questions that it raises about higher education and yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Um,
I know that's a topic that interests you as well as
it
me.
is, yeah, indeed.
So yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you could see something of value in it, aside from the other stuff. And I hoped when I read it, because I read it again more recently, even before this time.
Hmm.
And when I was reading, I was like, okay, I think there's something here. I think this can, if you sort of make your peace with like where it's going
Yeah.
and so on, then there's a
And
lot
also,
to take
yeah,
in.
and also just to reiterate, this doesn't happen. As I said at the beginning,
Yeah.
women still do not get justice when bad things happen to them.
Yeah.
And yeah, just ask women if you're not sure, ask a friend.
Yeah. I think the way it raises the issues, that is real and important is not necessarily in the outcome. It is sort of like, yeah, it's interesting to imagine a world in which this actually is the norm. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
it's hard for me to imagine that. That's definitely not how I take it. I definitely take it as a kind of heightened fantasy.
Yeah.
But that still like speaks to things, if not in the specifics, at least in
Mhm.
the issues it raises.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all. I think that's all true for sure. So,
Yeah.
any parting words?
Um, yeah, I don't know. Be be careful with men's paranoia because it can turn violence.
Yeah, and all y'all, if you're teachers, please don't
Yeah,
say
don't do these
I'm
things.
helping you because I like you, and don't
Yeah,
tell
we
stories about
I
your
mean I think
sexual
today
history.
has been instructive. I think we've given out some good advice.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God. Oh my God. Such a
Yeah.
nightmare. You could use Act One in like a Title IX, like
Yeah.
instructive context of like, here's some subtle things not to do. Because there's the obvious, you don't go like, you better have sex with me or I'll, or I'll fail you, right? Like, that's like the obvious thing that everyone knows you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I think this is good for illustrating smaller things that you might think nothing of and think is totally harmless, but they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, you shouldn't do those things either.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's it for now.
Yep. Until
Um,
next time, I guess.
yeah, buzz,
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 buzz.
buzz.